Chapter 11. Chapter text, Chapter 11. When Harry, Hermione, and the 5 French witches walked into Hermione's house, they were all enveloped in hugs immediately. Sirius had managed to locate the parents of the 5 girls, 2 sets of sisters whose parents were old friends, and had brought all 4 of them to the Grangers to wait. After all, the parents had fussed over their children and made sure everyone was uninjured, save from the budding black eye Harry had when Marie, the youngest of the French girls, had accidentally elbowed him when the sudden jump of the night bus had sent her flying. The father of the 2 girls tried to give Harry and Hermione a reward for helping his daughters, but Harry and Hermione refused to take anything for doing what they considered the right thing. Sirius ended up offering the French families a place to stay for the night, as it was already quite late and they had nowhere else to go. All their money was in galleons. Gringotts was already closed for the night, and places like the Leaky Cauldron, Hog's Head, and 3 Broomsticks would already be full. Having no better options, they gladly accepted, and after Harry gave Hermione a hug, they made their way to Grimmauld Place. It was after breakfast the next day when 2 grateful families disappeared through the flue in Grimmauld Place, leaving the place feeling a little empty. It wasn't long after that when an owl came in carrying a copy of the Daily Prophet. Shocking revelations as World Cup riot investigation starts. Ladies and gentle readers, as many of you experienced or read about yesterday, we can confirm the rumors that the rioters who attacked the fans at the conclusion of the World Cup were in fact dressed in Death Eater regalia. Not only that, but one ministry official who spoke to me anonymously has confirmed that each of the rioters they have in custody does in fact have the symbol of you-know-who tattooed on their left arm. We can also confirm that one of the rioters died when a panicking member of the public cast an explosive curse at the group of Death Eaters, although the caster is currently unknown. The dead Death Eater has been confirmed as one Lucius Malfoy. The late Mr. Malfoy was charged with being a Death Eater in his youth, but claimed to be under the Imperious Curse and was subsequently let go by the Wisengamot. That he was now found rioting while dressed as a Death Eater and had a dark mark brings his earlier innocence into question. It also can't be ignored that his sister-in-law is the escaped convicted Death Eater Bellatrix Lestrange. One Muggle and his newly discovered Muggle-born daughter were hurt in the attack when the masked rioters dropped the family they were holding hostage after losing control of their levitation spells. It is suspected that the young girl, who cannot be named for legal reasons, was spotted doing accidental magic by one of the previously unknown Death Eaters. Both are currently undergoing treatment, and the young witch is expected to make a complete recovery. Her father is also expected to live, though he will not regain the use of his legs. Harry felt the tension he didn't know he was carrying lift from his shoulders as he read the newspaper. The Death Eater he had killed had been Lucius Malfoy, one of the few people that Harry didn't have to convince himself needed to die. The man was a bigot and a straight-up murderer. Even in this timeline, he already tried to pass Riddle's diary onto Ginny so that she could be controlled into freeing Slytherin's monster so that it could kill Muggle-borns. He was concerned about Hermione, though. She was going to read the paper and think that she had failed and beat herself up over not being able to catch all of the Muggles. Hermione was going to see the father's injuries as her fault, when in truth they were Harry's. It was his plan to change things at the World Cup when he knew that if he did nothing nobody would have been hurt, but he did it anyway. The rational part of his brain was breaking down the numbers. Malfoy was dead. A number of Death Eaters were facing charges, and all it had cost was one man his ability to walk. Hermione, during one of their planning sections, had once told him about what was called the equation of war, costs versus gains, risk versus reward. The equation was definitely in their favor this time, but his conscience didn't seem to give a shit about that. Harry got his bike and cycled over to Hermione's house, knowing almost instinctively that the two of them needed each other today. Fourth year started September the 1st as normal. Harry and Hermione said goodbye to Dan, Emma, and Sirius at King's Cross, and not long after claiming their compartment, the engine of the Hogwarts Express fired up and started pulling them north. Luna soon joined them, and the 3 of them spent their trip north catching up. One thing Harry noticed was the absence of Malfoy. The bland git didn't come and bother them once. That was a change in the behavior of the Slytherin, so Harry decided that he would need to keep an eye out for the boy. It was possible that the death of his father was enough, that he realized that joining Dark Lords was dangerous, or he could be worse than before. Either way, it was worth keeping an eye out. Harry and Hermione were thrown a curveball when they got to the school. Instead of an empty seat waiting for Barty Crouch, pretending to be Moody, the seat was occupied by Professor Lupin again. Dumbledore even brought attention to it during his speech, saying that this was the first time in over 30 years that Hogwarts had the same defense against the dark arts teacher for more than a year, before he went on to announce the Triwizard Tournament. After the feast, though, things were almost identical to last time. The male Weasleys were bemoaning the fact that they couldn't enter while vowing to find a way to do so anyway. Some of the Gryffindors were also saying that they would enter, and others were trying to goad the rest of the of age Gryffindors to go for it. Harry and Hermione had other things on their mind, though. Harry, at Hermione's insistence, rushed up to the boys' dorm and dove into his trunk, grabbed what he was looking for, and tried to bolt back down the stairs, only to have to wait as the mass of boys coming up was impassable. He eventually got back to the common room to find a nervous Hermione waiting for him. He laid out the Marauders map, and after a wand tap and the password, they both started studying the map intently until Hermione pointed, saying, "There, in Professor McGonagall's private quarters with McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout." Harry looked where she was pointing, and sure enough, there was the marker labeled Remus John Lupin. So it really is Professor Lupin, not Barty Crouch Jr. "Looks that way. You said the map sees through Polyjuice," Hermione hedged. She had never seen Crouch's name on the map, so just had to take Harry's word on it. "But if Moony is here instead of Crouch, who's going to put my name in the goblet?" Harry asked, trying to find a way to keep their plan going. "Maybe that won't be a problem this year. Our other years have been relatively quiet by comparison to our first run-through. And maybe Tom is going to repent, give up on his world domination plans, and join a circus headlining as the Noseless Wonder," Harry joked. "Two things bothering me here. One, if I'm not in the tournament this year, that means we are now flying blind. Two, how is Moony here? What did we do to end the curse?" "Well, the curse seems pretty simple. We destroyed the Horcrux that was in the school. The curse was probably anchored to the diadem, and when you stabbed it with basilisk venom, you destroyed the curse along with the Horcrux. And as for flying blind, maybe we need to consider that you can't use a sample from a werewolf in Polyjuice. It has the same problem as using animal hair, or maybe a combination of human hair and animal hair would be more accurate." Hermione shivers as she remembered the furry consequences of her accident in the previous timeline. "And there is a good chance the drinker could catch lycanthropy, so that is probably why they didn't try to replace the defense against the dark arts professor. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've come up with another plan to get you into the tournament." Harry nodded understandingly. "Any idea what they will try?" "I have no idea. What about the rest of the teachers? Could they have replaced one of those, or perhaps a student?" She pulled the map to herself and started going over the names there, looking for Barty Crouch in the student dormitories and checking every teacher's name off a mental list. However, it seemed that everyone was indeed themselves, and the two teens spent an hour going over the map and trying to work out how Voldemort was going to try to kidnap Harry this year. They couldn't find anything, though, and eventually just went to bed. The next 2 months passed without incident. In the run-up to Halloween, all the Hogwarts students became more excited for the start of the Triwizard Tournament and the visitors from other schools. In contrast to this, the professors became almost neurotic, punishing students disproportionately for anything that they perceived would sully the castle's reputation and leave a negative impression on the visitors that would soon be in the school. Mr. Filch even reduced one group of first years to tears when, after a sudden heavy rain, they ran into the castle tracking in a little mud. Harry, who was still the son of Prongs, took exception to this, and with a little help from the Weasley twins, he spelled a bucket of glitter to float into the air and spell out, "Don't make firsties cry," when Filch got near, and then explode down the corridor outside the man's office. The best part was that the Weasley twins had spelled the glitter so that it couldn't be vanished. That meant that the cleanup had to be done by hand, so the professors weren't any real help getting rid of the sparkly mess. In the end, Filch was able to get rid of most of it, but the corridor outside his office seemed to sparkle whenever anyone walked down it now, proving that it was impossible to ever get rid of it all. The other schools arrived the same as they did last time, but this time Hermione waved her wand over the Beauxbatons visitors and cast a warming charm on them when she saw them shivering, earning her a grateful nod from a few of the visitors and a few house points from Professor Dumbledore. During the feast, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, Bartemius Crouch, brought out the Goblet of Fire. In turn, each of the head teachers tapped the goblet with their wands and declared that their school would be participating in the tournament and that the goblet was to select the best of their students to represent their school. That hadn't been done in the previous timeline, but Hermione said that it was how the goblet was activated, and the three heads must have done it in private last time after the feast. On their way back to the common room after the feast, all of Gryffindor was one again, saying how they would enter or were trying to push someone else to enter themselves. When some of the students said they were going to try and find a way around Dumbledore's age line, Harry was tempted to tell them to just get an older student to do it for them. It would serve them right for turning on him last time if one of them had to go through what he did. But as cathartic as it was to think about and to joke with Hermione about it, Harry didn't do it. It was a minor miracle that the tournament hadn't killed anyone the first time. It was with a sense of foreboding that Harry and Hermione entered the Great Hall for the Halloween feast and the drawing of the champions. The Great Hall was almost full, and the Goblet of Fire had been moved. It was now standing in front of Dumbledore's empty chair at the teacher's table. Harry and Hermione sat at the Gryffindor table and looked around them. Fred and George were telling everyone that they hoped it was Angelina now, that their attempts to get their names into the pyrotechnic cup had failed. The two of them still sported a bit of grey stubble, as the beards would persist for a few days, and the two of them were yet to gain proficiency with a razor. The feast was filled with the regular Halloween fare, as well as a few foreign dishes that were equally enticing. Once everyone had eaten their fill, and the desserts devolved into nothing, Dumbledore stood up and addressed the hall. "Well, the goblet is almost ready to make its decision. I estimate that it requires one more minute. Now, when the champions' names are called, I would ask them please to come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber." He indicated the door behind the staff table, where they will be receiving their first instructions. He took out his wand and gave a great sweeping wave with it. At once, all the candles except those inside the carved pumpkins were extinguished, plunging them into a state of semi-darkness. The goblet of fire now shone more brightly than anything in the whole hall, the sparkling bright, blue-eye whiteness of the flames almost painful on the eyes. Everyone watched, waiting. A few people kept checking their watches. Suddenly the flames turned red and spat out the first name. Crumb got the honor again and disappeared through the door to the trophy room. The second name came out of the goblet, lifted high on a tongue of flame. Delacca rose from her seat and followed Crumb into the trophy room. Third name came out, and Diggory got the loudest cheer of all the champions so far, but that was mostly from the Hufflepuffs, who greatly outnumbered the visitors. The Hufflepuff followed the other two champions through the door to the trophy room. Everyone else relaxed while Harry watched the cup with anxiety. He knew what was coming. It was gonna be the same as last time, except the difference this time was he was expecting it. The fourth name came shooting out of the cup. Dumbledore read it and said, "Harry Potter." Harry sighed, resigned to his fate, and stood up. With a nod to Hermione, he followed the three official champions into the trophy room. "What is it? Do they want us back in Z Hall?" Fleur asked. Harry didn't want to be the one to tell them that the tournament they had entered had been messed with, but decided not to stall. "No, my name came out of the goblet as well. Professor Dumbledore said he would be here in a minute to sort everything out." Harry explained as plainly as he could. "But that's ridiculous. Hogwarts can't have a second champion. That is most unsporting." Crumb's words were polite, but his tone said he was upset. "Agreed, and you are just a little boy. This tournament is far too dangerous for you. You will just Fleur started until she was cut off by Dumbledore, Snape, Karkaroff, Maxime, Crouch, and Bagman strode into the room. Dumbledore strode up to Harry and in his regular, calm voice asked, Harry, did you put your name into the goblet of fire? Harry looked the man right in the eye and said, No, sir, I didn't. And did you ask an older student to put your name in for you? His voice was still just as calm as before. No, sir. And if that's all it took, I'm disappointed in your security, sir. Harry said truthfully. He had thought about this flaw in Dumbledore's security as the Triwizard Tournament approached. What if, in a fit of pique, one of the school's blood purists who were of age decided to enter all of the younger Muggle-born students, hoping to kill one of them off? Your arrogance knows no bounds, Potter. You are disappointed with the headmaster's security. Just because you found a way around it and then stand there lying to our faces doesn't give you the right to degrade the headmaster. Snape sneered at Harry, getting into Harry's personal space. Harry rolled his eyes. Here we go again, Snape calling me a liar on evidence. No investigation. He just knows I'm at fault. What are you even doing here? There are no Slytherins here. You aren't mine or Cedric's head of house. Where is Professor McGonagall? You will show me some respect, Potter. I am your professor. Snape bellowed at him. Severus, if you would please go to my office so I can speak with you later. Your presence is obviously going to be counterproductive, Dumbledore said to Snape, and the dungeon bat left the trophy room after sneering at Harry again. Barty, you know the rules better than anyone else. What do we need to do? We must follow the rules, and the rules state clearly that those people whose names come out of the Goblet of Fire are bound to compete in the tournament. That is preposterous. Hogwarts can't have two champions. It is most unjust, Madame Maxim said after drawing herself up to her full height. I must agree with a limp. The tournament rules also say the goblet will select one champion from each school. If Hogwarts gets two champions, our schools should as well, Karkaroff said, sounding surprisingly reasonable to Harry. I didn't even enter. I don't want to be in this damn tournament. Can't you just disqualify me? Harry already knew the answer but had to ask anyway. Crouch spoke up. I'm afraid not, Mr. Potter. Your name coming out of the goblet means you are now under a binding magical contract. If you do not compete and put forth every effort to complete the tasks, then you will forfeit your magic and will have to live as a squib. What? A voice boomed from the doorway, where standing there were Professor Lupin, Professor McGonagall, and Sirius, the one who had shouted. He stormed into the room with a look of absolute fury on his face. Harry, please confirm to me that you didn't enter this tournament. You're not in trouble if you did. After the stuff you dad and us got up to then, I'm not enough of a hypocrite to punish you. But if you didn't enter yourself, then that means someone else did, and that can't go unanswered. Sirius was overtly trying to stay calm, and while angry, he wasn't angry at Harry. Sirius, I swear I didn't put my name in the goblet. I didn't ask anyone else to do it for me, and I had no intention of entering the tournament. Harry said solemnly, but calmly. Sirius nodded, then turned to the adults who were in the room before he got there. Okay, what's the plan to find out who put Harry's name forward to compete in this death trap of a tournament, and how are there 4 competitors instead of 3? As I understand it, the goblet selects one person from each school. If there were only 3 registered schools, then Harry would be either unchosen or Hogwarts champion. Fleur stepped in then. Excuse me, but before you get into all of that, wouldn't it be better to tell us what we need for the first task first? That way the unaffected champions can leave. Everyone stared at the French witch for a bit before deciding that she was right. Bagman gave them the same information that he did last time, that is to say, none, and the 3 other champions left. After that was an hour of arguing between the headteachers, Sirius and Crouch, that all amounted to basically nothing. Harry needed to compete or lose his magic. Hogwarts teachers were forbidden from offering Harry any extra help, and Dumbledore had no clue how to find who it was to put Harry's name in the goblet. The only real difference was that Sirius was going to go straight to the DMLE once he was finished with this meeting, and was going to push them to open a case of attempted murder for whoever had put Harry's name in the goblet, as well as a case of criminal negligence against Dumbledore, Crouch, and Bagman for not having tighter security on a magical device that created binding contracts while it was in a school full of children. Finally, everyone left, and Harry made his way up to the Gryffindor common room. The fat lady congratulated him on being a Triwizard champion, and Harry braced himself before climbing through the portrait hole. As expected, As soon as the door opened, he was hit by a wall of sound. All the Gryffindors were cheering for him and begging to know how he got his name into the tournament. Despite the fact that they had just come from a feast, there was a few platters of sweets on one of the tables, and someone pressed a butter beer into Harry's hands. Hermione had come up with a plan for him that, if he was lucky, would keep at least most of Gryffindor on his side this time. Harry climbed up on one of the tables and used a quick flick of his wand to let out the sound of a gong, getting everyone's attention. "Okay, everyone, listen up, because I don't want to have to repeat this a few hundred times," Harry said with a forced grin on his face. "I'm not holding out on you, refusing to tell you how I got myself into the tournament. I didn't enter my name. The current theory that the headmaster and my godfather have is that one of Voldemort's old supporters is taking the opportunity to kill me off while being as far away as possible." There was some murmuring, and Harry could sense some of the crowd turning against him, but he had expected that. "But whoever did put my name in is going to be disappointed, because I'm not going to die. I'm not going to humiliate myself. I'm not even going to sulk over this. What I am going to do is win. I'm going to win every task, and for the first time in centuries, the Triwizard Cup is going to have the name of a Gryffindor on it." Harry finished his little speech and could tell the crowd was on his side, at least for now. He would have preferred not to give a speech like that, but needs must. Now he and Hermione would probably at least have some peace in the Gryffindor common room despite anything else the other houses did. Tomorrow, he would need to face the rest of the school, and with Hermione's help, of course, try to work out a better plan for facing a dragon. Chapter 12. Harry Potter and the Phoenix Wand, ch. 12. Chapter text, Chapter 12. Most people thought that Harry was busy preparing for the first task, with Hermione's help. But the two of them actually spent most of November trying to work out how Harry's name had come out of the Goblet of Fire. Without Junior at the school, Voldemort had obviously found another way to do it. The problem was that without knowing who was working for the man, they didn't know who to be wary of. They had a list of suspects, with Snape atop the list because he was a backstabbing Death Eater. After how they changed things in the first year, Voldemort wouldn't have seen Snape saving Harry this time around, and he may have felt more comfortable approaching the man. There was also Karkaroff. Neither thought that if the man was offered a chance to redeem himself in the eyes of Voldemort, that he would turn it down. They had even penciled in Professor Lupin under the Imperius Curse, just because it was nearly always the defense professor. But they had no true evidence. They had tried to look at it in Luna's way. How would they do it if they were in Voldemort's shoes? Unfortunately, it hadn't yielded any fruit, as there were just too many people who were vulnerable, and Harry had no idea what information Voldemort had on people, so there was no way to work out who Voldemort would feel most safe with. Harry let everyone think he was preparing for the tournament, of course. He had considered throwing the first two tasks at first, just so the other champions could have some of the glory of the tournament, but Hermione sunk that idea fast. If Harry didn't have a lead going into the maze, someone else might get to the cup first, so that meant Harry had to give each task his all. He already had a strategy for each task. Over the years, he had looked back on them and worked out much easier ways to complete them. At one point, Harry even tried to concoct a plan to complete each task using only first-year spells. He hadn't succeeded, although he had come pretty close for the first task. The weighing of the wands was interesting. This time around, Rita wasn't a complete stranger, so her approach was completely different. Her goal was the same, a one-on-one interview with the boy who lived, but instead of trying to bully Harry into it, she actually asked and gave Harry the choice. Harry wanted to tell the 50-year-old woman wearing robes for a witch in her 20s to fuck off, but he didn't. He had the experience to know he needed to control the message that went out to the public, so he agreed. The first thing he did was deny her the use of her quick quotes quill, and with a huff from the witch they started the interview. She again tried to portray Harry as a rebel who flaunted the rules and entered himself into the tournament. However, Harry's confessed suspicions that it was a murder attempt by a free Death Eater. After all, we know after what happened at the W World Cup, there are some out there, was a much better story. She asked Harry how being in the tournament was supposed to kill him, and Harry reminded the woman that the tasks were designed for students in their final year of education. or were at least NEWT students. Harry was only a fourth year, so there was every chance he wouldn't have the required spell knowledge the task needed. Once the interview was over, it was time for Ollivander to examine their wands. Instead of going on about Harry's wand, this time Mr. Ollivander had asked Harry about what happened to the young lady Harry had met in his shop. The old man was delighted to hear that she and Harry were the best of friends and practically inseparable. That Cedric was able to ask if they were talking about Hermione was enough to tell Harry that he and Hermione were not as successful at flying under the radar this time line as he had believed. Harry waited in the tent for the start of the first task. Hermione sat with him for now, but she would have to leave and join the spectators as soon as the judges turned up. He looked around the tent they were waiting in and found that it was a lot nicer than he remembered. There was even a table with drinks set out, yet it all looked familiar. Harry's best guess was that the tent was exactly the same, or pretty close anyway, and he had just been too stressed to notice last time. If he had been as stressed as the other champions looked right now, then he could understand that. They all knew that they were about to face dragons. Harry had gone to the clearing again this time to confirm that the task hadn't changed, and had seen Maxime and Karkaroff doing recon for their champions. Harry had of course given Cedric the same hint as last time. He didn't want the Hufflepuff at a disadvantage just because Dumbledore couldn't get his head around the fact that he was the only one playing by the rules. He went to the drinks table and got everyone in the tent a glass of ice water. The other champions thanked him, glad to have something else to focus on rather than the knowledge that they were about to go up against a dragon. Bagman and the judges soon filed into the tent, and Hermione was told she had to leave, giving Harry one of her bone-crushing hugs before disappearing through the tent flap. Bagman ran through the task just like last time, and the order that they drew the dragons was the same as last time, but Harry and Fleur were the only ones who got the same dragon. It made some sense to Harry. Their biggest concern to the other champions was to not get the Horntail. It was the most dangerous, and its spiked tail was distinctive and easy to feel on the miniature. They weren't trying to put the most dangerous dragon on him, just avoiding it themselves. Harry didn't mind one bit, and even flashed the other champions a confident smile. His plan would work just as well for the Horntail as it would for any dragon, and Harry planned with the Horntail in mind. As Crumb had pulled the Swedish short snout this time, he was first. They couldn't see the task, but they could hear Bagman's commentary, and it was enough for Harry to work out that Crumb's strategy was pretty much the same as last time. Go for the eyes and grab the egg while it's distracted. One thing Harry didn't hear was any remarks about it costing Crumb points, so Harry had to assume that this time Crumb's dragon didn't trample her eggs. Harry was glad about that. No matter how big, dangerous, and scary dragons were, he couldn't help but compare them to his own mother in this situation, guarding her children from a wizard. If Harry ever found out who it was that decided to use nesting mothers, that person was in for an earful from Harry. He would have to ask the twins how to write a howler. After Crumb had collected his egg and the arena had been reset, Fleur went out to deal with her challenge. Like with Crumb, the remaining champions listened to Bagman's commentary, with one booming line from him explaining the whole thing. "Oh, would you look at that? Miss Delacour has charmed her dragon to sleep. Oops, sorry." Bagman, and his obsessive need to be loud, and the center of attention, had woken the dragon right back up. Worse, judging by the cries of sympathy from the crowd, Fleur had gotten hurt because of it. Harry just hoped that, whatever it was, Madame Pomfrey could fix her up again. Cedric was the last before Harry, and he was going to be facing the Chinese fireball. There wasn't much Harry could tell about Cedric's strategy from the commentary, though Harry could tell that Bagman didn't seem to care that his bumbling had gotten a champion hurt not even half an hour ago. There were a few gasps from the crowd, but eventually the cheer went up that told Harry Cedric had his egg. 20 minutes later, once the arena had been reset, it was Harry's turn. Once more unto the breach, he thought to himself, then shook his head. He had obviously been spending too much time with Hermione. He didn't even know where that quote was from. He made sure he had his wand and walked out into the arena. The arena was done up to look like the top of a mountain, with huge boulders all over the place. It looked like there had been some greenery at the start of the day, but that was all burnt black and was long dead before he got there. The nest was pretty obvious. filled with about a dozen real eggs, each a little bigger than a rugby ball, and the golden egg he would have to retrieve was sitting right on top of them. It would be easy to walk over and take it, if it wasn't for the dragon that was big enough to make Hagrid look like a baby if he was to stand next to the dragon. The dragon was crouched over her eggs watching him, while her eye would flick up to the stands and the people around them constantly. She was agitated and worried about her eggs, and as far as she was concerned, Harry was currently the biggest threat. Harry made a show of backing away from her, but staying in sight. He figured that as long as she could see him backing away, she would probably maintain the status quo and not risk leaving her eggs. He tried the summoning charm on the egg, but like he expected, it didn't work. Bagman's voice boomed out. "Sorry, Mr. Potter, it's not quite that easy." Harry smirked at that. Little did the annoying man know it was going to be that easy, well, almost. Harry pulled a thread from the sleeve of his robe and started to cast a bunch of simple charms on it, the most important of which was a sticking charm. Then, using Wingardium Leviosa, he floated the thread over to the golden egg and sat it down on top of the egg. The dragon either didn't see or didn't care about a single thread fluttering on the wind and did nothing but keep watching Harry. It was at this point Harry got ready to move quickly. So far the dragon had done nothing, because from its perspective Harry hadn't done anything, but that was about to change. A Keo thread. The golden egg came flying towards Harry, and the dragon, seeing an egg flying from her nest, was no longer in the mood to sit and watch. She launched herself at him with every intention of squishing the bug that was trying to steal one of her eggs. The only thing that saved Harry from the teeth that were suddenly occupying the same space he was only a handful of seconds before was that he had expected the dragon to attack and was already moving when the 7 tons of muscle launched at him. Harry grabbed the egg that was flying at him and dove behind a boulder just in time as the enraged mother dragon now unleashed her fire. The tricky part was now upon him. He crouched, ready to sprint, pointing himself at the exit of the arena. As soon as the roar of fire ended, Harry made like he was running from the hounds of hell and sprinted for all he was worth. The dragon, of course, saw him and launched herself at him again, but Harry got through the barrier first, though the tear that was now running down the back of his robes from the dragon's claws was a testament to just how close it had been. As soon as he was out of the arena, Madame Pomfrey was fussing over him, not believing him when he said he was fine. She bundled Harry into a tent she had set up to treat the champions. She parked Harry on a bed and started running diagnostic charms all over his body. While she was doing that, Harry looked at the other champions. Fleur was unconscious in the bed across from him. Her arm and torso were wrapped in bandages where blood had soaked through a few spots. Harry's heart went out to her, as it was obvious that Bagman had awoken her dragon and derailed her strategy. Cedric's left side of his head was covered in a thick, oily orange paste that Harry had heard mentioned could help with burns, but he was sitting up in his bed looking happy enough. Well, he looked happier than Crumb, who looked like he was sucking a lemon, but otherwise uninjured. Madame Pomfrey had indeed found a couple injuries on Harry from the task. He had apparently skinned a knee and an elbow when he dove behind the boulder to avoid being cooked by the dragon. A few quick waves of her wand was more than a match for the injuries that most people got as children. While Madame Pomfrey was dealing with that, Cedric called over to him. "Good show, Harry. Crumb and I got to watch your attempt. That was a brilliant idea to attach something you can summon to the egg. Proves that I was majorly overthinking the task." There was no hint of pain or unfriendliness in his voice. Harry shrugged. "I had to go with what I know. What did you do?" Madame Pomfrey finished fixing him up and went back over to Fleur. Cedric went on to explain the same strategy he had used last time, transfiguring a boulder into a dog and trying to get the dragon to go after it instead. The problem with that strategy was that a nesting mother dragon was always going to try and keep her nest in sight and would abandon any prey to protect her eggs. Hermione came bursting into the tent then and tackled Harry into his hospital bed, pinning his arms to his side as she hugged him, happy that he was still alive. Unlike in the previous timeline, they didn't give the scores for each after their part of the task was done, but instead wanted until the end and gave them all at once. Harry, Crumb, and Cedric were back in the middle of the arena, facing the judges waiting for the scores. They were going to come out in the same order that they had faced the dragons, so Crumb was up first. Champion Crumb faced a Swedish short snout and used the conjunctivitis curse to great effect. Then, while the dragon couldn't see, he created a noise away from the nest and swiped the egg while the dragon was distracted. Bagman told everyone, even though the only people there who hadn't seen it were Harry and Cedric. Golden ribbons raised from the wands of the judges and twisted around themselves to form numbers Director Crouch, 8 Director Bagman, 6 Headmaster Dumbledore, 8 Headmistress Maxim, 7 Headmaster Karkaroff, 10 total. 39 out of 50, there was some light booing at Karkaroff's score. It seemed that the crowd didn't think that Crumb deserved a 10. Next, Champion Delaca charmed her Welsh Green to take a nap. However, she didn't remain asleep, and Champion Delaca was attacked by the dragon, sustaining enough injury that the safety team had to intervene. Champion Delaca failed to retrieve her egg. I have also received word that Champion Delaca is expected to make a full recovery, Bagman explained. Director Crouch, 3 Director Bagman, 4 Headmaster Dumbledore, 4 Headmistress Maxim, 6 Headmaster Karkaroff, 3 total. 20 out of 50, Harry felt bad about Fleur's score, as it was due to Bagman waking the dragon that Fleur had failed the task and gotten hurt. He wished there was something he could do about it. A few of the crowd seemed to agree with Harry and were now accusing Bagman of sabotage. Bagman ignored them and gave Cedric's recap as the judges gave their scores. Director Crouch, 7 Director Bagman, 6 Headmaster Dumbledore, 7 Headmistress Maxim, 7 Headmaster Karkaroff, 5 total. 32 out of 50, the crowd cheered for Cedric. He was only a few points behind Crumb, which, considering the burn Cedric had, was rather generous. But Cedric was always going to get a big cheer from the Hogwarts students. Now it was Harry's turn. Champion Potter faced off against a Hungarian Horntail, and our youngest champion was the fastest, getting his egg and clearing the arena. He was also the only champion to not suffer an injury. Champion Potter was the only one of the champions who tried to summon the egg, and when he discovered the egg couldn't be summoned, he improvised a way to get around the anti-summoning charms. Director Crouch, 8 Director Bagman, 10 Headmaster Dumbledore, 9 Headmistress Maxim, 9 Headmaster Karkaroff, 5 total. 41 out of 50, Harry wasn't surprised that he was in the lead. Over the last 6 years, from his point of view, since he had completed the task the first time, he had probably spent more time working on a solution to the task than the organizers did coming up with it. After the scores were given out and the contestants were congratulated, the 3 of them were pulled into conversation with the judges where they were told the golden eggs were a clue to the next task. "What about Miss Delaca? Shouldn't she get an egg as well?" Harry asked, a little angry that they would sabotage Fleur like this. He still remembered how she came and helped with the Death Eaters that attacked the school after Malfoy let them in. Fleur deserved better than this. No. The rules were clear. You had to retrieve your own egg, Barty Crouch said in a tone that said he thought Harry was being stupid. Harry wasn't done yet, though. Don't the rules also say that the champions are to complete the task without interference? I think a judge who can't keep his mouth shut and waking the dragon counts as interference. Harry's tone was firm and hard in a way very few 14-year-olds can pull off. A few of the judges shifted uncomfortably at Harry's words, and Madame Maxim shot Harry a smile. It did start a debate amongst the judges, and even they had a vote on it. Dumbledore and Maxim voted to give her an egg, but the others refused. Crouch was sticking to the rule book, and according to him, 2 wrongs didn't make a right. Harry thought the man was a hypocrite, given he had his Death Eater son under the Imperious Curse for the last decade. Bagman was obviously just following whatever would make him the most gold with his bookie. Karkaroff was the easiest to read. He just wanted to give his champion the best opportunity to win the tournament. Harry decided right then that he would help Fleur. He wasn't sure how yet, but he would do it. He wasn't going to be so cruel as to leave her on the shore of the lake, terrified about her sister. There was a massive party in Gryffindor that night. The only other Gryffindor parties that rivaled that night were the times Gryffindor won the Quidditch Cup. This was actually bigger, as there were more than a few people from other houses. There weren't a lot from Slytherin, as most of them didn't like Harry or Gryffindors in general, or Hufflepuff, as they were probably having their own celebration for Cedric in their common room. The Ravenclaws, however, were there in force, with about 30 of them in attendance, including Luna, who was chatting with Hermione. Practically everyone that took the time to come and congratulate Harry and tell him that he deserved first place, but Harry didn't feel like he did. He kind of felt like he had cheated, or cheated more than everyone else, having had years to plan for the task. He kept telling himself that he had gotten first place the first time as well when he was the least prepared champion, but even then he was tied with Crumb. Now he had pushed everyone else down. Harry just didn't feel like he deserved his score, and that everyone seemed to want to praise him just made it worse. He was just getting himself a drink when Luna came up behind him, grabbed his arm, and pulled him through the common room. It took Harry until they were halfway to the dance floor part of the common room to notice that the blonde girl was also pulling Hermione along as well. Once they were at the dance floor, they were inside the sound suppression charms set up around them, and the music was too loud to talk. That didn't stop Luna from communicating that she wanted to dance with her friends, and neither Harry or Hermione had the heart to turn her down. The three of them danced together to a song that Harry was sure was by a group of young-looking vampires that called themselves the Necromancers. It was considered a fun prank to tell Muggle-born first-years you are a big fan of the Necromancers without any context and watch them panic a little when they look up necromancers. Harry and Hermione started to dance along, and soon Harry started to relax. Something about dancing seemed to help him relax and stop worrying about his score. After about 3 songs, the music slowed, and everyone around them started pairing off to slow dance. Harry was about to duck out and return to the drinks table, but Luna had a different plan. She grabbed a passing Carling Creevy for herself and pushed Harry at Hermione. Hermione either didn't see Luna push Harry at her or she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and they started to sway to the music. While Harry and Hermione were distracted by each other, Luna pulled Colin to the side. "Hey, Colin, do you have your camera on you?" The boy pulled a disposable one from his pocket. "I always have a camera, you know that," he said, looking at his classmate questioningly. Luna grinned. "Great. Take a picture of Harry and Hermione dancing together for me," she said, pointing at the 2 teens dancing in the middle of the dance floor. Colin, who didn't need much of an excuse to take photos, started lining up for a shot. "Why do you want a picture of Harry and Hermione?" "Those 2 belong together, and they are the only ones who don't see it, so I push them together, and I want a picture to show them when they realize they are perfect for each other." Luna sounded so excited. "So basically you're a shipper." Colin laughed good-naturedly at his friend. Luna didn't understand the Muggle term, so she had Colin explain it, and agreed that she was. Once Colin was done taking photos, she gave him a peck on the cheek and pulled him back onto the dance floor, where both couples spent most of their time for the rest of the night. Now Luna just hoped that the 2 boys would wake up and see what was in front of them. Chapter 13. Chapter text Chapter 13. It took Harry 4 days to decide what he wanted to do about Fleur not having a clue to the next task. He took his egg to the room of requirement first and created a pool to check that the clue was the same as he remembered. As it was the same clue, Harry really didn't need the egg, though he did write down the clue so that he could be seen to be going over it later. Later that same day at dinner, he approached Fleur. "Mr. Lacker, may I have a moment of your time, please?" he asked. Fleur turned to look at him, and so did the rest of the Beauxbaton students. Because the French delegation were all focused on Harry, about half of the rest of the students started to watch him as well, though he was getting used to being everyone's favorite soap opera, so he ignored everyone but Fleur. Yes. What can I do for you, Mr. Potter?" The French witch obviously had no idea why Harry was talking to her, as she looked like she was preparing to turn him down when he asked her out. Harry couldn't blame her. He saw what had happened to her during the run-up to the Yule Ball in the previous timeline. "Mr. Lacker, after the first task I argued that you should be given the clue anyway, not out of charity," he added quickly. "But because it was unfair that one of the judges sabotaged you by waking up the dragon after you had charmed it to sleep. Some of the judges agreed with me, but not enough." Harry explained, but it was obvious that Fleur was confused by where he was going with his little speech. "However, I don't need the judge's permission to give you this." Harry pulled the egg out of the bag he usually used to carry his class books and tossed it to the girl. Fleur caught the egg, no longer confused but looking resigned. "Let me guess, you want a date in exchange." She actually sounded resigned to giving Harry a date to get the egg. "And don't you need the egg yourself?" Harry held up his hand's palm out towards Fleur. "I don't bribe girls for dates, Mr. Lacker, and I have already worked out the clue in the egg for myself. The only thing I want is to give you a fair opportunity." The judges seem to have forgotten that this tournament is supposed to be about cooperation between our schools and nations, and a British judge sabotaging a foreign champion isn't going to leave anyone willing to cooperate with us in the future. There was a lot of muttering from everyone watching Harry and listening in on his conversation. Fleur smiled at him and said, "Merci. Thank you, Mr. Potter. I was worried about how I would face the next task without being able to prepare, but now I think I have a good chance." Harry was just about to tell the witch that it was nothing when he was interrupted by Dumbledore. "An excellent show of good sportsmanship, Harry. Though I do need to question, are you sure that you have worked out the clue?" Harry nodded. "Yes, headmaster." He quickly cast a muffliato and leaned in towards Dumbledore and said, "Come seek us where our voices sound," before he stood up straight and cancelled the muffliato charm. The headmaster's eyes narrowed as if he was studying Harry before he relaxed. "Very well then, Mr. Potter. You have in fact found the clue, so the egg is yours to do with as you like. If you wish to give it to the lovely Mr. Lacker, then that is not anything I nor the other judges can prevent. Oh, and I think 50 points to Gryffindor for good sportsmanship and helping to right an injustice." A cheer went up from the Gryffindor table at Dumbledore's pronouncement, and most of the other students in the Great Hall clapped politely, though the students with a green trim on their robes mostly didn't bother, which looked more odd than usual, as the Beauxbaton students and the Durmstrang students definitely did join in the clapping, even with enthusiasm from the Beauxbaton students. A few days later, Harry and Hermione were sitting in Transfiguration. Near the end of the lesson, Professor McGonagall cleared her throat to get everyone's attention. Harry looked down at the guinea fowl that he had been practicing turning into a guinea pig for the last hour and suddenly realized what announcement their head of house was about to make. Indeed, Professor McGonagall told the class about the Yule Ball, causing half of the boys to stiffen at the thought of needing to ask a girl to the ball and about half the girls to get giggly. Harry considered who he was going to ask to the ball. He wasn't going to leave it until the last minute like he had in the previous timeline, as that had only caused problems. This time, he was going to ask someone today. Hermione leaned across him and grabbed his book bag, pulled it into her lap, and started rummaging about looking for something. It was a pity that he couldn't ask Hermione, Harry thought. She was in the same position as him. Wait, why couldn't he ask Hermione? It wasn't like she was seeing anyone. She wasn't pining for Crumb to ask her again, and they were friends. They would have fun together, and it's not like they hadn't danced together before. Best of all, Hermione wouldn't be going with the boy who lived. She would expect Harry, nothing more. Hermione pulled Harry's homework out of the bag and placed it with her own, ready to hand to Professor McGonagall when they left. As he expected, Professor McGonagall called on him to stay behind for a few moments after the lesson. The rest of the class filed out, dropping their homework on the professor's desk as they passed. Hermione waited by the door as Harry approached the professor's desk. "It's okay, Professor. I already worked out that if there is a big fancy ball for the tournament, and that my date and I will need to open the dancing." Harry jumped in before Professor McGonagall could say anything. Very well, Mr. Potter. I'm glad you are on top of it. I presume you are equally on top of your dress robes. They're fitting for someone representing the school." Harry laughed, which caused Professor McGonagall to look at him, her expression hard. "Sorry, Professor. I went shopping for my robes with Sirius over the summer. I just remembered the set he tried to make me buy. I would have looked like a Christmas tree. But yes, I have suitable robes now." Professor McGonagall nodded. "If I were you, I would go and check those robes. Knowing Sirius Black as I do, he's probably bought the other robes and transfigured them to look like the ones you think you have, with a timer set to transform them back just before the ball or right in the middle of it. It is the sort of thing he would find funny." Harry paled at that. His professor was right. That was exactly the sort of thing Sirius would do. He would need to check his robes tonight and make sure that they were fine. Professor McGonagall saw the look on Harry's face and understood that her warning was taken to heart, so she dismissed him. Hermione had been waiting by the door for him and fell into step next to him as he left. Harry glanced over at her. "Hermione, I was wondering if you would," she cut him off with her response. "Of course, Harry, I will help you check your robes. Professor McGonagall is right. That is the sort of thing that Sirius would do. It would be embarrassing as hell if your robes were to transform into the monstrosity you described in the middle of the ball." Harry smiled at her before saying, "Thanks, Hermione. I appreciate the help, but that wasn't what I was going to ask." She looked at him with a questioning look on her face. "Would you like to go to the ball with me?" Surprise passed over Hermione's face for a few seconds, but then she looked at Harry again, studying his face, looking for something. Whatever she was looking for she must have found, because she nodded once, more to herself than Harry. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, and she nodded again, this time definitely at Harry. "Yes, Harry, I would love to go to the ball with you." At her words, Harry felt a smile spread over his face, and the two of them went down to lunch together. News that Harry and Hermione were going to the ball together went around the school rapidly. Although the two of them had no idea about the betting pool the Weasley twins were running, so had no idea why they were the topic of so much gossip. This time, however, the whispers weren't accusing him of being the heir of Slytherin, cheating to enter the tournament, though there was still some of that from Hufflepuff and Slytherin, and they weren't whispering that he was an attention-seeking liar. All in all, the whispers that debated whether Harry and Hermione were officially an item now were a lot easier to put up with. Between asking Hermione to the ball and Christmas Day, there were a few things that Harry needed to do. First, he checked his robes, as Professor McGonagall had suggested, and he found that she was right to warn him. Sirius had indeed switched them with the ugly robes and transfigured them into a copy of his robes. Harry had no way to tell when the transfiguration would wear off, but knowing his godfather, it would have been at the most embarrassing moment. He considered writing to Sirius and asking him for his robes, but wrote it off as a bad idea. Sirius would probably just prank them as well. Instead, Harry and Hermione got permission from Professor McGonagall to leave the castle to do some shopping. Professor McGonagall wasn't happy with it, but took them to Gringotts, and then to get Harry some new robes. In retaliation, Harry's first few Christmas gifts to Sirius were a piece of coal and a note that he had spent the money for Sirius's gift on replacement robes. Copying Sirius's prank, he transfigured them into a Christmas jumper and novelty mug, and set the transfiguration to wear off shortly after the presents had been opened. He did, however, still send Sirius a bottle of fire whiskey via Madame Rosmeter at the Three Broomsticks, who had a service where underage people could buy alcohol for adults as gifts, but she would wrap and send off the gift without it ever getting into the hands of someone underage. It was technically illegal, as it was selling alcohol to underage witches and wizards, but nobody really cared as long as she didn't let the alcohol get into the hands of kids. Harry, Hermione, and Luna did spend some time together trying to work out who had put Harry's name into the goblet of fire, as Professor Lupin was confirmed to be himself and not a Death Eater in disguise. But none of the known names of Death Eaters ever appeared on the Marauders map, except for Bartemius Crouch, but that was Crouch SR, as far as they could tell. On Christmas Day, the whole school was abuzz about the upcoming ball, and a bunch of Gryffindors decided to blow off some steam with a snowball fight. Everyone was having fun as flicking wands saw snow flying back and forth, with the girls all ducking out halfway through so that they could start getting themselves prettied up for the ball. The boys gave it an extra hour or so before they too started to disappear to get ready as well. The Weasley twins were some of the last to leave, but they did give the field of battle one last wave of their wands before they left, leaving two impressive snow forts for the younger students who didn't need to go to get ready for the ball. Harry found it took him longer to get ready this time, as he found he couldn't be so uncaring about his appearance this time. He was more aware of the fact that how he presented himself would be seen by everyone around him, and tonight he would be dining with some high-ranked members of the ministry. He was certain that Bagman was at least a gossip, and how Harry presented himself tonight could have some bearing on how the ministry reacted to him when he announced Voldemort's return. Originally, he had planned to kill Voldemort at the graveyard at the end of the year, but despite all the research they hadn't been able to find where the cup was hidden. Harry also just couldn't slapdash for Hermione like he had done last time. Hermione had stood by him, though so much that she didn't deserve anything less than his full effort. One big help had been given to him by Sirius over the summer. Sleekeazy's hair potion was actually made by Harry's great-grandfather. It was originally developed to manage the curse that is Potter hair. The recipe was later sold to a company that makes beauty potions for a hefty sum, as well as a small stake in the company, and any Potter could get a free bottle of the potion every 3 months. With the help of the potion, Harry was able to tame the hair he was cursed with. This took longer than expected, however, as he didn't have the slightest clue what would look good on him, but eventually he settled on something he thought looked quite good. Harry was still the first one down out of him and Hermione. When she did finally come down the girls' stairs, he was one of the only students whose jaw didn't drop in shock. She was not wearing the same set of dress robes she had last time, though the color was similar. But periwinkle blue was both one of Hermione's favorite colors and a color she looked good in. This dress, however, did something Harry would have sworn was impossible. It made Hermione look like her real age. If he hadn't known better, he would have sworn that the girl walking down the stairs smiling at him was in the body of a young woman in her early 20s rather than the 15-year-old one he knew she currently occupied. Harry felt the smile spread over his face as Hermione saw him and smiled, and she quickly made her way over to him, her silver high heels barely slowing her at all. "Wow, Hermione, you look amazing." Harry complimented Hermione out loud before leaning in and whispering quietly, "Even better than last time." Hermione blushed a little, not used to such compliments from Harry. "You don't look half bad yourself," she admitted. He offered Hermione his arm, and the two of them made their way down to the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall pulled them aside when they got there and directed the two of them to join the other champions and their dates in the trophy room just off of the Great Hall. The champions and their dates were to be formally announced once everyone else had arrived and taken their seats. Cedric and Crumb were already there. Cedric had once again brought Cho, but as Crumb hadn't been able to ask Hermione this time, he had asked one of the Durmstrang girls that Harry had never bothered to learn the name of. Harry didn't know if Fleur was thinking of herself as fashionably late or something, but they did have to wait another 15 minutes for her to drag an almost drunk-looking Roger Davies in behind her. Dinner was nicer this time, as it was Crouch himself who turned up rather than Percy Weasley. And while the man was a little dry, he was perfectly presentable and even complimented Harry for his solution to summon an item that had been charmed to prevent summoning during the first task. He had apparently sent a memo around to the Auras about the technique, as it could prove a useful strategy for dealing with some cursed objects. "Tell me, Mr. Potter, have you ever considered a career as an Aura? I think you might have what it takes to be a good one," Crouch asked. That question had instantly put Harry on edge, as it had been Junior in the previous timeline who had suggested that Harry be an Aura after school. Could that be why the map wasn't showing who was being impersonated? Was Crouch impersonating his own father with the same name? Not really. I'm the last Potter. I think I would prefer a career without a mortality rate and work on rebuilding my family a little, Harry replied. If this was Crouch Jr., maybe he would report to Voldemort that Harry was soft, and the snake-faced git would underestimate him. I can see why you could choose that option. I'm the last of my line as well, but after the deaths of my wife and son, I couldn't face getting married again. But maybe the Aura's loss will be another department's gain. There are plenty of safe careers in the ministry. My own department is one of the safest. International cooperation may not be flashy, but good work. I don't know. I can't see myself writing reports on the thickness of cauldron bottoms, Harry said truthfully. Crouch looked at him, confused for a second before recognition flashed on his face. Oh, Weasley's project. While I will admit it is boring work, 8 to 10 witches and wizards die every year in Britain and Europe due to faulty cauldrons. If some boring paperwork and reports can help bring that number down, those are real lives that are saved. It's worthwhile work that could have a real positive effect on our society, even if all most people will do is complain about the slight increase in the cost of buying a new cauldron. Looked at from that point of view, Harry could see why Percy was so proud of his project. And even though Harry hadn't said anything in this timeline, he still felt like he owed Percy an apology. As most of the students danced, Daphne Greengrass and her date for the evening Blaze, Zabini, were standing next to the drinks table watching Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. "Are you sure this will work?" Blaze asked, eyeing his date's cold smile. "Of course, I have been planning this since I learned of the ball this summer. I have everything worked out." Daphne took a drink of her punch after she spoke. "I still say we should have used something stronger," Blaze repeated to her for the 8th time since she told him her plan. "And I told you it's an unnecessary risk for no additional benefit. Plus your plan was just skeevy." Daphne sounded exasperated. "It's not like I planned to slip them anything strong." "I don't care how strong they are. If I ever catch you slipping a love potion to a girl for any reason, I will chop off your family jewels and transfigure them into a lovely set of earrings for said witch." The venom in her voice spoke of how much the pretty young witch detested those potions. Blaze turned his lower half away from the witch next to him as he said, "It's not like those two aren't already together. All the love potion would do is give them a push and win us the bet. We don't need a love potion for that. We just need good old-fashioned bottled courage." She held up a bottle of vodka from her expanded handbag, careful not to let anyone else see, but Blaze see it. Neither Harry or Hermione realized they were drinking alcoholic drinks whenever they took a short break from dancing. Normally, he wouldn't have been so eager to spend time on the dance floor, but after his victory in the first task, he had wound up dancing with Hermione after Luna pulled them both up to dance in the Gryffindor common room. The two of them had so much fun that Harry wondered why he was so reluctant to dance until recently. As the evening progressed, Hermione grew slightly less stable in her high heels and had to lean on Harry a little to keep from falling. The two of them danced closer and closer throughout the night until they were dancing while Hermione rested her head on Harry's chest. After about 2 hours, the two needed to get out of the Great Hall. The two of them were overheating, and a hall full of teens dancing to the Weird Sisters wasn't the best place to cool off, so they went out into the garden that had been set up for the evening. "Harry, why did you ask me to the ball?" Harry thought about it for a few long seconds before he answered. "I wanted to enjoy the evening, and when I thought about it, you were the only one with whom I could see that happening. Anyone else, and it would have felt like a chore, an obligation that I just needed to get through it and be done with it. But with you, I am having fun," Harry explained as they walked around flowering bushes. "I'm glad you asked me. I like things like bowls anyway, but coming with you is so much more special." Hermione went silent for almost a minute before she spoke again, this time in a quiet, unsure voice. "Harry, I want to try something, but I'm afraid." "Hermione, you are one of the bravest people I know. What could be so scary?" Harry asked. It took Hermione a few moments to pluck up the courage to answer Harry. "Losing you as my friend," Hermione admitted. "Impossible," Harry stated as though he was quoting a fundamental law of the universe. "I doubt there is anything you could do that would keep me from being your friend, Hermione. After all these years, you are the only one I can truly trust without any doubt whatso." Harry never got to finish what he was saying as Hermione grabbed him and pulled him into a kiss. Harry froze as his brain tried to catch up with the reality that Hermione was kissing him. She stopped suddenly and looked at him sadly. "I'm sorry, Harry. I knew I shouldn't." During Hermione's apology, Harry's brain finally kicked back into gear, and he realized what a mistake he had made. Hermione had kissed him, and he had stood there like a plank and done nothing. She probably thought he hated her right now. He tried to think of what to say, but then suddenly he knew what to do instead. He didn't even let Hermione finish talking. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, then did what he should have done earlier and pressed his lips to hers. Hermione relaxed in his arms and started to kiss him back, and everything just clicked for them both. This was why most people assumed they were together, because they really were. They had just been too blind and too stubborn to see it for themselves. The kiss slowly deepened, and the two of them started to get more enthusiastic until they were interrupted by a camera flash. They turned to see Daphne Greengrass and Blaze Zabini standing there, Daphne holding a camera with a wide grin on her face. "Looks like we won the bet." Chapter 14. Chapter text, Chapter 14. Harry woke up slowly, and the first thing he noticed was the headache. It was only small, but it was annoying enough that it was still the first thing on his mind. The next thing he realized was that his mouth was dry and disgusting, and only then did he notice that there was a large weight on his chest. Harry opened his eyes to examine what on earth the weight was, only to see a large mass of Hermione's bushy hair covering his face. He remembered what had happened the night before, the Yule ball, the dancing, taking a walk in the garden, and kissing Hermione. Harry felt a warm feeling welling up in his chest. They had talked once they got back to the common room and decided to give a relationship a try, but they were going to be careful about it. No matter what, they didn't want to risk their friendship, though he was sure after the rough patches that their friendship had already been, though, with the bond between them only growing stronger, that it would take something monumental to truly risk it. Their one concern was from Greengrass and Zabini. The way they had taken their food last night suggested that something more might have been going on. At Hermione's insistence, they were going to go by the hospital wing today and have Madame Pomfrey check to make sure neither of them were under the effects of something like a love potion. They didn't think they were, but Hermione wanted to make sure. They had ended up falling asleep on one of the sofas in front of the fire after their talk. Harry had checked the time once and found it was 2 in the morning, and they had kept talking for some time after that. He couldn't see the common room clock from where he was lying, and Hermione had the arm with his watch trapped between him, and the sofa, so he couldn't check it either. But given the amount of light that was coming through the window, he guessed that the only reason the two of them were still alone in the common room was because the other students were still sleeping in after their late night. Harry decided that he had to wake Hermione up, as it wouldn't be long until students started coming down, and if the two of them were down here, showing obvious signs of having not gone to bed, they would make assumptions that he was sure Hermione didn't want them to make. "Hermione," Harry said as he placed a hand on her side, making sure she didn't roll a little and fall off the sofa as she woke up. "Hermione, I need you to wake up. Darn, Warner. Comfy." Hermione mumbled, still half asleep. "People will be here soon," Harry told her. Hermione turned to look at him and half opened one eye. "Harry, why are you in my bed? Am I dreaming again?" Hermione asked, her head still clouded in sleep. Harry smiled at that. In her early morning confusion, she had just admitted to dreaming about him in her bed, and the part of him that was flooded with teenage hormones couldn't help but grin at the idea of what he and Hermione were doing in her bed in those dreams. However, he had to focus. "I'm not in your bed. We fell asleep in the common room, and everyone is going to start coming down soon, and we need to shower and change," he told her. Harry's words seemed to quickly bring Hermione to her senses. Oh my God, I need to go get changed. I'm so sorry for falling asleep on you." She climbed up off him, straightened out her robes, and started to rush off up the stairs before stopping and turning back, walking up to Harry with a slight blush on her face before she leaned down and captured his lips with her own. Harry quickly lost himself in the sensation of Hermione kissing him. She reluctantly broke the kiss, stood up, and smiled at him. "I really enjoyed my time at the ball last night, Harry," she said before she turned around and disappeared up the girls' staircase, leaving Harry with a dopey expression and a smile on his face. Harry and Hermione waited until mid-morning before they went to the hospital wing for what must have been the most awkward conversation that Harry ever had with the school nurse. "Excuse me, Madame Pomfrey." Hermione spoke rather nervously and quickly. "I was wondering if Harry and I can get checked for love potions, please." The nurse looked over Hermione and Harry with a piercing look, noting that the two teens were holding hands before she sighed. "And what makes you think that the two of you may need a test for love potions? And do you need a morning after potion, Miss Granger?" Hermione blushed. "No, I don't need one of those. Nothing like that happened," she told the older woman, and Harry noticed that the healer's shoulders relaxed when she said that. "Harry and I became a couple last night, but something someone said makes me afraid it wasn't our choice. I'm really hoping that I'm just being paranoid, but I'd rather be sure." Madame Pomfrey nodded. "I can understand that. Given how the two of you are together, I don't think you are under a love potion, but I will check and make sure. Can the two of you please sit on that bed there while I receive a testing kit? Oh, can I ask what was said?" Madame Pomfrey motioned to one of the beds nearest her office, which she stepped into and left the door open so that they could keep talking. Harry answered this time as they sat down on the bed. One of the Slytherins took our photo during our first kiss and said something about winning something. That makes some sense, Madame Pomfrey said as she returned with 2 packets in her hand. While not strictly allowed under the school rules, it's not uncommon for students to have betting pools. I wouldn't be surprised to find that there was one on when you two would share your first kiss. And at the Yule Ball, at least after it became so well known that the two of you were going together, it might have been a good bet that someone took the photo for evidence to collect on a bet. Neither of the teens knew how to feel about that. The idea that there were enough people in the school who considered their relationship such a foregone conclusion that they were betting on when, not if, was a big thing to get their heads around. Now these kits are pretty simple to use, the healer said as she held out 2 vials, each with a potion. Unstoppering the vial, you will find it has a pin on the underside of the stopper. Use that to prick your finger and add 3 drops of blood to the vial. Give it a little shake, wait 30 seconds, and then we can consult a color chart to determine the results. Both teens did as instructed. Harry pricked his thumb while Hermione decided to prick her index finger. They added the requisite 3 drops of blood to the potion stop at the vials, gave it a little shake, and waited 30 seconds. Both potions turned a shade of pale blue, and Madame Pomfrey looked at the potions and smiled. Well, this is good news. This is exactly what I want to see whenever I use one of these kits. Pale blue means you are not under the effects of any love potion, nor are there any remnants of such in your system. Both of the teams felt a wash of relief flood through the system. Their feelings were just theirs, and there was no trickery involved. So what if someone like Daphne Greengrass was able to make a few galleons by guessing when it would happen? The two of them left the hospital wing feeling lighter than they had when they arrived. With the Yule Ball out of the way, Harry and Hermione returned to their preparations for their upcoming conflicts. They made sure they were still proficient with the bubble head charm after having learnt in their 6th year. Being a spell that Harry hadn't had any cause to use much for years, it took him a bit of practice to get back up to scratch with it. But once ready, the two of them did spend some time in the room of requirement after having used it to create a replica of the environment at the bottom of the Black Lake to practice some of their spells underwater. They were also planning on what they were going to do at the end of the 3rd task. They were sure that was the day Voldemort was going to try and kidnap Harry again. According to Hermione, when she'd been reading the Horcrux books, there were some references to the ritual that Voldemort had used to return himself to a body, and the summer solstice was an important component of the ritual, or rather the end of the ritual. Voldemort would have had to start making some preparations on the winter solstice, the symbolism being that Voldemort grew as the days got longer. Would Voldemort still try using the Triwizard Cup as a portkey? Without Crouch Jr. taking the place of Alastor Moody, would they be able to ensure that Harry was the first one to get to the cup? After all, Voldemort wouldn't be happy if after all his preparations he was stuck with some random person that wasn't his enemy. What if he got Crumb? Bulgarian wasn't a bad sort, but he had some loyalty to his school and his headmaster, a school that preached blood purity, and a headmaster who was at one point a Death Eater. Hardly counts as the blood of an enemy. And what about Fleur? From what Harry knew of the young woman, she would definitely consider herself on the opposite side to Voldemort, and therefore would count as an enemy. But how would Vila blood, the blood of an all-female near-human magical race, affect the results of the ritual? Would Voldemort want to take such a risk? But if Voldemort didn't want to take such a risk, how would he go about kidnapping Harry? And more importantly, how could Harry turn that kidnapping to his advantage? With Christmas over, the time until the 2nd task didn't seem that long. Before Harry knew it, January was over and February was disappearing just as quickly. On the morning of the 2nd task, he couldn't find Hermione anywhere, so he knew who his hostage was. His plan for handling the 2nd task was rather simple. He was going to speedrun it. Armed with his knowledge of the task from the previous timeline, he knew he didn't have to worry about other hostages, waiting down there concerned for the other champions to show up, so he was going to get down there and back as fast as he could. Given what he knew and how long he and Hermione had to plan, he thought he could be down there and back pretty quickly. As they had guessed, The tournament organizers chose Hermione as his hostage this time. She was the obvious choice for him, especially after she became his girlfriend at Christmas. It didn't mean, however, that he was a fan of the idea, especially as Hermione wasn't asked beforehand. So Harry stood on the pier with the three other champions listening to Bagman drone on and on about stupid stuff, while trying to get the crowd excited about sitting and watching the surface of a lake on a cold morning in February, wanting to get the task underway as soon as possible. Finally, 11 came around, and all the waffling ended with the whistle blown for the start of the task. Harry checked his pocket again for the weird random-looking items he had brought with him. As eager to get on with it as he was, he did wait until all the other three champions had dove into the lake before he did anything, starting with summoning one of the school boats that quickly came floating over to him. He climbed in and pulled out a map he had copied from the Marauders' map that morning. Harry had gotten lucky. While the whole lake was not on the Marauders' map, the part of it that contained the merfolk village was. He had been able to see exactly where Hermione and the other hostages were in relation to the rest of the Hogwarts grounds. So with a quick tap of his wand, he was able to send the small boat so that he was parked directly over the village. It was only then that he cast the bubble head charm and pulled a stone out of his pocket that he had picked up on the shoreline. He cast Engorgio on it, turning the pebble into a boulder, and held on as it suddenly pulled him under the water, straight down to the village of the Merpeople. Either the Black Lake was much deeper than Harry realized, or gravity works surprisingly slowly through water, because it took Harry a few minutes before he had to end the Engorgio on the rock before it could hit one of the Merpeople's homes. He heard the singing of the Merpeople calling to the champions to the center of their village, so he swam in that direction. Harry found the hostages quickly enough that the Merpeople, who all seemed to have gathered in their village square to watch for the champions, were surprised to see one of them so early. He didn't wait around, though. He swam up to Hermione and released the bonds that were holding her to the statue. He took the rope that had held her and used it to tie Hermione to himself so that she was on his back looking over his shoulder. Then Harry withdrew the last weird item he was carrying, a balloon. Not a standard party balloon, but instead a much larger, stronger variety called a punch balloon that Hermione had gotten her parents to get for him. While not indestructible, these balloons were meant as toys for kids that would last at least a few days, and also had a loop on them that came with a long elastic band attached. Kids were meant to hold the band in their fists so that they could punch the balloon and it would spring back, allowing them to punch again and again in rapid succession. Harry, however, had removed the elastic and instead attached a shorter piece of rope that he now looped through the rope that was holding him and Hermione together. He took his wand and put the tip in the open neck of the balloon and cast Venters. The spell created a gust of air, but it was trapped inside a balloon, blowing it up instead of creating wind as the spell originally was intended for. With the air in the balloon, that was now the size of a small beach ball, the two of them started to rise to the surface. It was a little awkward for Harry to get his wand out of the neck of the balloon and to pocket it without letting all the air out of the balloon, but he managed it and was even able to tie off the balloon once he had two hands free. It took quite a bit longer for them to float to the surface than it did for Harry to sink to the bottom, but Hermione came to life as soon as her head broke the surface of the water. After a few seconds, she got her bearings, and he untied the rope that was holding them together. Once freed, Hermione gave Harry one of her patented rib crackers she called hugs, and he summoned the boat to them, as they had surfaced a good 100 FT from it. The boat floated over to them, and then the two of them had fun trying to work out how to get into the boat without tipping it over. In the end, Harry levitated Hermione into the boat first, and she returned the favor. With a tap of his wand, Harry sent the boat back to the pier and pulled Hermione into his arms in an attempt to share what little body heat the two still had. He stepped back onto the pier 26 minutes after 11, according to his watch, and the two were quickly bustled into the medical tent by Madame Pomfrey, who didn't waste any time in pushing pepper-up potions into their hands and told them to drink. Being the first back by such a large margin meant that when it came time for the judges to give the scores, Harry was already dry and clean, whereas most of the others, while dry, were still covered in a layer of lake grime and shivering a little. The only exception was Fleur, who was probably using her innate Vela fire magic. What an exciting task we had today. Bagman's voice boomed out, sounding cheery, although it came across as false, as all the spectators grumbled after having had to watch the surface of a lake for over an hour. The judges have decided to give out the scores as a whole this time, rather than separately. In fourth place, we have Miss Delacour, who arrived back at the pier 10 minutes outside of the time limit with her hostage, her little sister. According to the chieftainess of the merpeople, Fleur was also the last of the champions to arrive at their village where the hostages were being held. She did, however, use the bubble head charm to great effect and fought off a pack of grindelows, so we award her 30 points. The crowd clapped politely, though there were a couple of boys cheering like she had won the whole tournament. In third place, we have Cedric Diggory, who also used the bubble head charm and arrived at the pier with his hostage, his date to the Yule Ball, 3 minutes outside of the time limit. According to the chieftainess of the merpeople, Mr. Diggory and Mr. Crumb arrived at the village at the same time. Mr. Diggory is awarded 35 points. The crowd reaction was more enthusiastic this time, though Harry guessed this was more to do with the fact that Cedric was a Hogwarts student, and a majority of the students were also from Hogwarts, rather than any particular joy at watching what Cedric had accomplished. In second place, we have Victor Crumb. Mr. Crumb, instead of using a bubble head charm like the other champions, used a partial human transfiguration and turned his head and part of his upper torso into that of a shark, giving himself gills. He also transfigured his hands and feet so that they would be more adapted to moving in the water. These changes meant that, even though he reached the village at the same time as Mr. Diggory, Mr. Crumb was able to swim back to the pier with his hostage, who was also his date for the Yule Ball, much quicker. He arrived 4 minutes inside the time limit of the task, and as such, he is awarded 40 points. The cheers for Crumb were almost as loud as the ones for Diggory. And in first place, we have the largest upset of the task and the tournament of all so far, the boy who lived himself, Harry Potter, who arrived with his hostage back on the pier only 25 minutes into the task. Mr. Potter used a combination of the bubble head charm, the engorgement charm, and the summoning charm to reach the merfolk village in record time. He summoned a boat and used it to position himself above the village, then the engorgement charm on a pebble to sink directly down to the village. After freeing his hostage, Mr. Potter used a wind charm to fill a balloon and use it to return to the boat, which he then used to return to the pier with his hostage, who was also his date to the Yule Ball. Most of the judges feel that this warranted full marks, however we decided to officially award Mr. Potter 48 points. Harry received the loudest cheer of all, even if a large part of the school didn't like him, such as the Slytherins. They did not want to be seen not supporting a Hogwarts student who had done so well. Harry suspected that by tomorrow most of them would return to business as usual, such as calling him a cheat when they passed in the halls. Right now he didn't care at all for the adulation. He actually was cheating because he had done all this before. It might be necessary, but every second he had made over the others was a chance to keep them alive. So as the scores currently stand, in fourth place, with a total of 50 points out of a possible 100, we have Fleur de Lacre. In third place with 67 points, Hogwarts' Cedric Diggory. In second place, we have the international Quidditch star Victor Crumb with a total of 79 points. And in first place, with a total of 89 points, we have Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Harry winced at the commentator using that hated title again, but Bagman continued. The final task will be on Midsummer's Day, and the champions will be informed of all the pertinent details exactly 1 month before the task. Until then, let's have one final round of applause for the champions. Bagman got everyone clapping and cheering again. Taking it as their dismissal, the champions climbed down from their platform and made their way back into the medical tent where the hostages were waiting for them. Hermione was waiting there, now more because of Madame Pomfrey's more cautious nature rather than any actual need. Harry laughed to himself when he had the thought that Madame Pomfrey would keep someone overnight for observation if they came to her with a splinter. He sat himself next to Hermione, rather than in the bed Madame Pomfrey wanted him in, because honestly right now he needed to hug his girlfriend more than he needed fussing over by the nurse. "Hey, Hermione." His girlfriend turned to look at him. "It's a Hogsmeade weekend next week. Want to go together?" "Harry, we always go to Hogsmeade together." I meant, I meant more like a date," Harry clarified. "Oh, right. Yes, Sorry, I was being an idiot for a moment. I would love to go on a date with you." Hermione agreed, a big genuine smile on her face. Chapter 15. Chapter text, Chapter 15. Draco Malfoy wasn't having a good year. It all started when his father saw a young mudblood performing accidental magic at the World Cup and decided to get his old friends together to do something about it, to show the little bit of filth what her place was before she could come to Hogwarts and have Dumbledore and his soft ways give her the delusion that her life was actually worth anything. But everything had gone wrong. One curse from a random witch or wizard was all it had taken, and his father was dead. His mother suspected that it was a foreign wizard who hadn't learned to fear the Death Eaters in the previous war. It didn't really matter who it was, though. What mattered was that Lucius Malfoy was dead. Not just dead, dead while publicly dressed as a Death Eater in the middle of an assault on Muggles. The Malfoy name was currently dirt, though the Ministry hadn't levied any fines against the house, though Malfoy was sure that was because his mother had bribed the minister, saying that it was already on record that his father was susceptible to the Imperious Curse, and he couldn't defend himself in a trial. The problem was everyone else. Every ally that the Malfoy family had were keeping their distance. Malfoy had tried to get meetings with the warlocks of the allied houses, but all he ever received back was a notice that basically said that being seen with the Malfoy at the moment was tantamount to declaring that they were on the side of the Dark Lord, and that Malfoy needed to stay away if he was to have any hope of keeping those friendships in the future. Without those alliances to help him, Malfoy was on his own with only his mother for backup. His mother wanted them to keep their heads down and slowly rebuild the house's standing. However, Malfoy had ruled the Slytherin dungeon using the influence his father had shared with him. Now Malfoy was bloody, and the Slytherin common room was more of a shark tank than a snake pit. If he didn't do something soon to remind everyone what his family stood for, then things might get desperate. Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF, Letter 3DF. Harry and Hermione were blushing as red as tomatoes as they stood in line waiting to get one of the Listral-drawn carriages down to the village of Hogsmeade. While they had each done this dozens of times before, this time it was a date, and they were both nervous. Harry's nerves weren't helped by the fact that the only experiences he had with taking someone on a date had all turned out disastrously. Taking Padma to the Yule Ball, taking Cho to Hogsmeade, and taking Luna to Slughorn's party. Apart from the one with Luna, which was only ever as friends, they had not had a good ending. Once they were in the carriage, and heading down the road that led to Hogsmeade, Hermione cuddled into Harry and wrapped her hands inside his cloak to steal his body warmth. It was something she had done plenty of times before, and Harry automatically did what he always did and wrapped an arm around her shoulder, pulling her in a little tighter. He couldn't miss, though, that the girl he was on a date with had pressed herself against him. Now that he looked at it from the outside, it was obvious why everyone already considered them to be together. If he saw two people acting like they did, Harry was sure he would jump to the same conclusion. Once they reached the village, their first stop was tomes and scrolls. While not traditionally on the Hogsmeade date checklist, it was bloody cold, and visiting the Shrieking Shack to Snog was less appealing when needing to visit Madame Pomfrey to have the frostbite reversed. But far more importantly, Harry's date was the biggest bibliophile that he had ever encountered. He wasn't exactly a fan of searching the bookstore for what Hermione was calling treasures, which as far as Harry could tell meant books she wanted to read that were cheap enough that they were in her budget. But he did like the look on Hermione's face whenever she found a book she wanted. There were a couple that Hermione reluctantly returned to the shelf, and Harry took note of the titles. They were lucky that the owner of the shop was in, as he offered to send the stack of books up to the school for them. Otherwise, they would have been stuck carrying the books for the rest of the day, and the big leather-bound tomes that the magical world preferred were not as light and portable as a stack of Muggle paperbacks. As they left, Harry handed the man a hastily scribbled note and a stack of gold coins when Hermione couldn't see. She then wanted to try Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, and Harry, while not really being a fan of the place, agreed that a hot drink would be a good idea. The tea shop was nowhere near as bad as the last time Harry had visited in the future. With it not being Valentine's Day, the gaudy over-the-top decorations were gone, and their atmosphere was a lot more relaxed. They chose an out-of-the-way table for a couple near the back, and when Madame Pudlifoot came to get their orders, both ordered a hot chocolate, and Harry got a scone with closed cream and raspberry jam, while Hermione ordered a croissant. The hot chocolates each came with a small bag of marshmallows, and neither teen hesitated before emptying the whole bag into their drinks. "So, are you enjoying yourself?" Harry asked nervously and awkwardly. Hermione looked at him over the mug of hot chocolate she had been gently blowing on to cool. "Yes, Harry, I'm having a great time. Just relax. I'm not expecting some grand surprise or the ultimate date. What we normally do in Hogsmeade is already pretty date-like. We just get to do things like this now." And at that, she leaned over the small table that separated them and pressed her lips against Harry's. Harry, who had grown to love the frequent little kisses that Hermione gave him since Christmas, returned the kiss with equal enthusiasm. Both teens were a little embarrassed when, after finishing with their kissing, they found a need to apply a couple of heating charms to their once-hot chocolate. Apparently getting caught up in a moment doesn't stop time passing for everything else. They soon finished their drinks and baked goods and returned to the chill of a Scottish winter as they did some window shopping, stopping in Honeydukes so Harry could refresh his supply of sweets. He also got Hermione a box of deluxe sugar quills, a favorite of hers that she would never admit to due to her parents being dentists. He wished that there was somewhere more upscale that he could take Hermione to lunch, but unfortunately, the only restaurants he had ever seen in the magical world were pubs that also served food. Harry supposed that there would be one somewhere. He didn't think people like Narcissa Malfoy would consider an evening at the Leaky Cauldron or the Three Broomsticks an acceptable night out. But wherever that was, it wasn't in Hogsmeade. The Three Broomsticks was, as it always was on Hogsmeade weekends, loud and overcrowded with Hogwarts students, fighting with the regular crowd to be the next to order a drink or a meal. Harry asked Hermione to find them somewhere to sit while he went to order them something to drink and eat. He waited in a crowd of what felt like half of Hogwarts, but was eventually able to get to the barmaid, who was considered quite the looker by most of the Hogwarts boys, and ordered a couple of butter beers and 2 plates of the day's special, honey roast ham with fried eggs and chips. Rosmerta was too busy to talk, so after getting the drinks, Harry went over to the table that Hermione had found. "Harry, I was wondering, once we are finished with school and the war, what do you want to do with your life?" Hermione asked after her first sip of butterbeer. "I know you were originally thinking about joining the Auras. Is that still the case?" Harry considered the question for a moment. "Honestly, I can't see myself joining the Auras anymore. Originally, it was more about continuing the fight after Hogwarts. Joining the Auras wasn't really an after-the-war thing. It was part of the war. But we're already so much closer to finishing it than we were last time. If we can actually get this done, so he doesn't come back in the future, I don't think I'd like to keep fighting. I don't really need to rush anything. There is enough gold in my vault that it will last me a good few years. I'm not sure what I want to do, but something where people are regularly trying to kill me. Well, I've had enough of that. I could always try playing Quidditch for a few years, if nothing else catches my eye. Whatever happens, I'm looking for something where my family doesn't need to worry about whether I am coming home. What about you?" Hermione seems to like Harry's answer. "Well, I want to do something to help the House Elves. I haven't really focused on SPEW this time. I wanted to focus on getting rid of Voldemort and the Death Eaters first. I was thinking maybe the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. I think from there I could spearhead an animal welfare law preventing cruelty to any magical creatures that a witch or wizard owns. I was thinking if we have pictures of a few of the cuter animals as a focus, like Krups, Kneasels, Puffs, etc., Then I can get a law passed that protects house elves quickly, and then work on getting them reclassified as magical beings instead of creatures, as well as centaurs, merpeople, and a bunch of others. Really, the only other race the ministry considers beings are goblins, and that's mostly because Gringotts would close the bank and refuse to open if the ministry ever reclassified them as creatures. Harry smiled at her. That plan sounds almost Slytherin. Hermione shrugged. Almost everyone has some ambition and cunning, Harry. That's the problem with the Hogwarts house system. Most schools, it's just random what house you have. It's just a team for sports days and house cups. But because Hogwarts bases it on personality traits, how many smart people don't end up at the top of their class because they are more loyal than smart and end up in Hufflepuff? By sorting the way we do, Hogwarts discourages developing the traits of the houses you don't get sorted into. How many times have you heard things like, "We are blank, we don't charge in like Gryffindors"? We are both the kind to charge in and act. That's what got us into Gryffindor in the first place. But I'm as smart and bookish as any Ravenclaw, and you want to win a war before your enemy even realizes he is fighting one. So that's pretty Slytherin as well. That's also without pointing out we are both loyal to our friends and don't shy away from hard work, the Hufflepuff traits. Harry smiled as Hermione went off on one of her impassioned rants. Well, the hat did consider putting me in Slytherin, but I asked it not to as it was Voldemort's house, and I already had a bad impression of Malfoy, so I asked it to put me anywhere else. The hat also said I didn't have a bad mind, so I see what you mean though while something might be a stronger part of someone doesn't mean the other traits shouldn't be nurtured. Just then, their dinner appeared on the table in front of them, and the two were distracted with the delicious food, which quickly disappeared as the two chatted about inconsequential things. Harry was about halfway through his dinner when he remembered his butterbeer and took a drink from the full drink. He returned his drink to the table and was just reaching for his knife when he suddenly couldn't breathe. At first he thought he was just choking on a bit of butterbeer, embarrassing and unpleasant, but something that happens to everyone occasionally. But then he couldn't cough it up. In fact, he couldn't cough at all, and then his stomach started to feel like it was on fire. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF, Hermione was having a great time with Harry. First, he had taken her to the bookstore where she had managed to find a book on permanently resizing and reshaping minerals, which had been reduced in price to almost nothing because it was an older edition. If she was right, then you could use the information in the book to build your own house. And if that was true, then maybe it would be an option for her to build her dream house. Even if it wasn't, it would still be a fascinating read. Then they had tried the tea shop, and it was nice, though rather boring until she'd gotten distracted by Harry's lips. Now they were in the Three Broomsticks talking about their futures. The daft boy had totally missed the point and assumed she was asking about career options and gotten her distracted talking about her plans. However, he had said that he wanted a career that fit around having a family, so that was enough for her right now. Their dinner arrived, and Hermione was enjoying her first real date until Harry started to choke on his butterbeer. Hermione sent him a sympathetic look, but 10 seconds passed, and Harry still hadn't stopped choking. His face was turning red, so Hermione pointed her wand at Harry and hit him with a spell to clear his airway. However, instead of sucking in lungfuls of air as she expected, Harry started to foam at the mouth, and his body stiffened and started to have some kind of fit. Hermione panicked. Harry obviously wasn't just choking on his drink. Was he sick? Did he catch something? No, everything was happening too quickly for that, and she had to do something because Harry wasn't breathing. Hermione tried to vanish the foam that was blocking Harry's airway, and she was rewarded by Harry taking a deep and desperate breath. However, her relief was short-lived, as only seconds later there was more foam coming from Harry's mouth, once again blocking his air. Hermione did her vanishing spell again, and he once more took a desperate breath. This time, she didn't wait and cast the spell again. She could feel that the amount she had to vanish each time increased, like whatever was doing this to Harry was fighting her efforts to keep him alive. Hermione didn't know how long she was kneeling on the floor, vanishing foam from Harry's lungs as he coughed and sputtered trying to get enough air, while a bunch of people who had been enjoying an afternoon in the pub stood around them watching. What she did know was that she couldn't keep this up forever. Casting spell after spell back to back like this was burning through her magic, and she was quickly approaching a limit where she wouldn't be able to keep going. Someone put a hand on her shoulder, but she ignored it to focus on Harry and kept casting. She barely noticed another person kneeled on Harry's other side. "It's okay, we got this. Let us do our job now." Hermione turned and found that the witch who had put a hand on her shoulder was wearing the lime green robes that were the uniform of the healers at St. Mungo's. "I have to keep vanishing the foam, or he can't breathe," Hermione insisted weakly. "My colleague can do that now. You sit down and get your energy back up," the witch said in a tone of authority that Hermione was too tired to fight against. She looked at the colleague the witch had indicated and found a wizard who looked like he was younger than her real age, already vanishing the foam from Harry's lungs. Hermione slid out of the way, but stayed close to Harry holding his hand. The witch started waving her wand over Harry, casting diagnostic spells all over him. "Okay, it's not a virus, not a bacteria. I don't detect any curses or hexes that have gone out of control. Bloody hell, the boy's been poisoned." The healer was muttering to herself, but Hermione was close enough to hear her and her eyes went wide. The healer put a hand in her bag and pulled out what looked like a stone, which Hermione realized must be a bezoar. "Okay, I'm going to need you to swallow this for me, young man. Do you think you can do that?" She held up the stone for Harry to see, but he shook his head no. "Okay, I have a charm that can help. Just let me pop this in your mouth." Harry didn't object, and the healer quickly put the bezoar in his mouth, and with a quick wave of her wand, the stone shot down Harry's throat. "The foaming is slowing. It should stop in a few minutes," the younger healer who had taken over from Hermione told the other. "It hurts." Harry was able to choke out a few words now that the foam coming from his lungs was slowing, and he wasn't having to fight for every breath. The witch answered him. "The poison didn't just fill your lungs with foam, it was also burning away at your stomach. The bezoar neutralized the poison, but it didn't fix the damage that was already done. You are going to have to come to St. Mungo's for at least the next few days, but you should make a full recovery." Hermione relaxed hearing that, and after a bit of fussing around, Hermione and the witch healer both busied themselves collecting samples of what Harry had been eating. The healer so they could run tests on it, and Hermione so she should give samples to the DMLE. Then Hermione, and the two healers supporting Harry between them, disappeared into the flue to St. Mungo's hospital. "Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Okay, Miss Granger, can you please tell me what happened from your point of view?" Kingsley Shacklebolt asked Hermione. Harry was sleeping next to her, a dreamless sleep potion allowing him to remain unconscious while his digestive system and lungs were still damaged to the point of agony. Hermione had refused point-blank to leave his side, which was why the aura she knew well from the Order of the Phoenix was asking his questions here. It was difficult for Hermione not to react when Kingsley had walked through the door with her mother, who was there because Hermione was a minor, at least legally, and needed an adult to be questioned by the DMLE. From her perspective, the man was an old friend, whereas he had never met her in his life. Hermione explained how she and Harry had been out in Hogsmeade on a date, and how Harry had just started choking in the middle of dinner. Kingsley had written down everything she said, and was surprised when Hermione told him that she had also collected samples of what Harry had been eating for them to test. "If you can determine whether it was in what he had at the Three Broomsticks, then it could help work out who poisoned Harry, right?" Hermione asked. "Normally, yes, but in this case, we already know who did the poisoning. Madame Rosmutter has already admitted it." That shocked Hermione. Madame Rosmutter had never been against Harry or anyone else for that matter. The woman operated under the rule that as long as you behaved yourself in her pub, then you were welcome. It looks like she was placed under the imperious curse and forced to poison Mr. Potter. That made more sense to Hermione, but then she realized this exact thing had happened last time. Malfoy had imperioused Madame Rosmutter to poison a bottle of mead meant for Dumbledore, which ended up poisoning Ron after he had gotten dosed with a love potion meant for Harry. Hermione hadn't been involved in that incident. She had only been told about it later, so she hadn't connected the two incidents straight away. Hermione debated internally if she could point the auras at Malfoy in a way that was believable. She would need more than just, "It was Malfoy. I know he did it." In the end, she decided that she would talk it over with Harry when he woke up. She and Shacklebolt talked for a bit more as he asked questions, and Hermione told him everything she could. Then the man left Hermione alone in the room with her mother and an unconscious Harry. "So you and Harry were on a date. When did the two of you finally admit you are dating?" Emma Granger asked with a sad smile on her face. "Harry asked me to be his girlfriend at Christmas. We're taking things slowly. We don't want to risk our friendship if this doesn't work," Hermione explained as she took Harry's hand and held it. Her mother shook her head in the way that Hermione knew meant that she thought her daughter was being naive. "Hermione, I don't think you have much to worry about in that regard, though you and I are going to be having a long talk when you get home this summer." Hermione blushed. She could remember what talk her mother had planned, and it had been embarrassing enough the first time. "Mum, Harry and I aren't anywhere near there yet." Hermione whined in the way teens can only do with their parents. Emma Granger gave her daughter a hard look. "Hermione, you spend 9 months of the year in a boarding school. Even if you aren't ready for sex yet, can you honestly say you won't be by next Christmas or Valentine's Day? We will talk this summer, or you won't be going back to Hogwarts. I'm sure we can find an all-witches school for you." "Fine, we can talk. Just don't expect me to be enthusiastic about this," Hermione capitulated. "Now can we drop this in front of Harry, please?" She definitely didn't want Harry to hear any of this. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. Harry felt like he had to force himself awake. He imagined it was like trying to swim in a pool full of golden syrup, a lot of effort for not getting very far. It was still too much effort to even open his eyes, but as Harry became aware of himself, he noticed that he was lying down in a bed. Someone holding his hand, and his lungs felt like someone had filled them with sandpaper. "Oh." His voice was weak and raspy. "Harry." "You're awake, oh finally, how are you feeling?" Harry recognized Hermione's voice and sentence structure, and the hand holding his tightened as she spoke. "Oh," Harry elegantly repeated. He heard someone get up and leave the room, but he knew it wasn't Hermione as she was still holding his hand. "What?" He tried to speak, but it was hard. It hurt and his voice was weak. "You shouldn't try to speak yet. Just nod and shake your head for now, okay?" Harry nodded. That made sense and talking hurt. "You wanted to ask what happened." At his nod, Hermione told him about how he had been poisoned. "Oh, Harry, it was horrible. Once we flew here to St. Mungo's, they took you straight into a treatment room, and I was left just sitting outside. The Auras came and talked to me. They wanted me to go to the ministry with them, but I refused to leave. I gave them samples of the food and drink you were eating to test. Turns out that was a waste of time. For poisonings, the DMLE sends samples here to St. Mungo's to test. Apparently they have the best potions team in the country, and they specialize in breaking down poisons and working out an antidote. The healers had already collected samples for their team, and it's standard practice to send a report to the DMLE in a case that looks like it might be deliberate poisoning." Harry was finally able to open his eyes as he continued to listen. "They had you in the treatment room for hours." Sirius turned up at some point. I'm not sure when. I just noticed at one point that he was sitting next to me, and I had been crying on his shoulder. Eventually, they worked out the counter to the poison, but it had already damaged your lungs. The foam that I was clearing from your lungs wasn't just choking you, but was also acidic and burning away at your lungs. You've been in a healing coma for 3 days while they worked on your lungs." "How long?" "I told you, 3 days." Harry shook his head. "How long till you can go back to Hogwarts?" Harry shook his head. "How long till your lungs heal?" Harry nodded. "Well, Healer Nightingale, and it's no relation, I asked, said that it will take a month to fully heal, but you should be at 95% within another 3 days. Harry was confused. He didn't think he knew any Nightingales to connect a relation to. Hermione must know one at Hogwarts. None of that mattered to him, though. It was going to take 3 days until he could breathe properly again. The door opened, and Sirius walked in with a man in lime green healer robes. The healer was all business and examined Harry and the condition of his lungs, then wrote out a prescription that copied itself, one set attaching itself to a clipboard at the foot of Harry's hospital bed, and the other folding itself into a paper aeroplane and flying out the door, presumably off to wherever St. Mungo's potion lab was. He must have guessed right, as not even 10 minutes later, an apprentice healer came in with a tray of potions. Harry had to drink 6. one to stop the pain from his lungs, one to oxygenate his blood directly to cope with his currently diminished lung efficiency, one to remove the carbon dioxide from his blood, one to vaporize any dead skin in his lungs so he could just breathe it out, and two to actually heal his lungs. The apprentice healer told Harry he would be taking these potions every 6 hours for the next 3 days. Harry did the math in his head quickly and realized he would have to drink 144 potions over the next 3 days, and all of them probably tasted like water that a troll had used to soak its feet. 5 minutes later, he had to admit he was wrong about the taste of the potions. They tasted worse. But he also had to admit that after the pain potion and the potions that replaced his breathing, he felt 1,000 times better. His breath was shallow and a little laborious, but he didn't feel out of breath, and when he tried talking the pain was gone, though his voice was huskier, and he still had trouble saying more than 3 or 4 words before he had to breathe in again. "So tell me, who did this to me?" Harry asked Hermione and Sirius after the healer and his apprentice had left. "Well, Harry, the Auras don't know yet. They found out it was Madame Rosmutter who put the poison in your butter beer, but they also found out she was under the Imperious curse. She is incredibly shook up by all of this and has written to me to convey her deepest apologies," Sirius explained. Fuck. It was all Harry needed to say. It was impossible for the DMLE to track who had cast that spell on Rosmutter without testing the wand of the person who did, and the chance of that happening without an eyewitness was remote at best. Even with the potions, the more he talked, the more the soreness returned to his throat, although now it was more like a bad cough. Understanding that Harry couldn't talk much, Hermione pulled out a book and started reading it to him. Hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. So it was Malfoy, right? Harry asked Hermione as they walked from the hospital wing to the Gryffindor common room. It had been impossible for the two of them to talk about their suspicions at the hospital, as they were never alone. Hermione hadn't left his side, sleeping in the chair next to his bed, even when he said it was fine for her to go home or back to school to sleep. But there had also always been an adult there with them who wasn't in the know. The most common was Sirius, followed by one or the other of Hermione's parents, but even Professor McGonagall and Professor Lupin had each stopped by for a shift. Harry understood. He had been attacked and they were worried for him, but he would be lying if he said he hadn't found it a little irritating after 2 days. It was his plan in the other timeline, but that in of itself isn't proof, and it's not like we can tell the authorities why we suspect him. True. Is there anything we can do? I don't think so, Harry. It's not like we can tell anyone how we know what we do. True, we'd end up with Lockhart as a roommate. No, remember, he still has his memories this time. Oh, right, I wonder what happened to him. I heard that his publishers dropped him after he got students pregnant, and he is on the hook for child support. He is now working as a freelance manuscript editor. Basically, if a writer wants someone to check their punctuation and spelling, they can pay him to do it. Harry laughed, and Hermione looked at him. I wonder if he will edit essays. I could send him my defense against the Dark Arts 1, and maybe he would learn some of what he was supposed to teach. Hermione laughed along as well. I'm just glad that this won't interfere with the third task. The last thing we need is me losing my magic due to not being able to compete. Hermione looked at Harry, surprised, and then she smiled. Harry, that's it. She took off, running back the way they had come from, Harry guessed towards the library. Still unable to run yet, Harry followed at a walking pace. He found her in the library, reading a thick leather-bound tome that looked like it was a couple 100 years old. When Harry put a hand on her shoulder to tell her he was there, she looked up at him. It's right here, Harry, look. She passed the book over to him. Harry looked at the passage that she was indicating and gave a quick read through. This is perfect, almost too good to be true. Are you sure it would work? Hermione bit her lower lip, her nerves failing her a little, and said, Well, I need to do a little more research to check, but I think so. He recognized when she was just second-guessing herself, so he just leaned in and gave her a quick kiss before saying, This is perfect. It took Harry and Hermione 3 days to finish checking what she had found would work the way they wanted to, then another week to check the legality of doing it, and they were in the clear. They decided on doing it on Friday, as the weekend would likely be needed for dealing with the fallout. After classes had ended, Harry and Hermione walked into the great hall hand in hand. But instead of going to the Gryffindor table to eat, Harry, with Hermione, there supporting him, walked up to the staff table and waited politely, as Dumbledore was in the middle of a conversation with Professor Vector and had held up a hand asking them to wait a moment. Once Dumbledore had finished with his conversation, he turned to Harry and Hermione. "Good evening, Mr. Potter, Miss Granger. What can I do for you this evening? And how are you feeling now, Harry? Everything healed up after the unpleasantness?" "I'm mostly good now, sir. Still a little short of breath, but Madame Pomfrey assures me everything will be back to normal in 2 weeks." "I'm glad to hear it," Dumbledore said, sounding sincere. "Sir, as per my right as a champion of the Triwizard Tournament, I formally request an audience with the Goblet of Fire," Harry said, in the most polite way he could. "Harry, that's extremely dangerous. You could very easily lose your magic if you do anything even slightly wrong. I refuse your request," Dumbledore said in his usual grandfatherly tone, the one Harry wished he could still trust. "I'm afraid I must insist, Professor, and with all due respect, I phrased it as a request, as a courtesy. If a champion asked for an audience with the Goblet of Fire, then there is nothing a judge can do to prevent it." "But Harry," Dumbledore started, but Harry cut him off. "Sir, I understand why you are concerned, but I have already made up my mind." Harry tried to be as nice as he could, considering he was dismissing the headmaster's concerns and essentially using the Triwizard contract to order the man around. "Headmaster, if the boy wants to rush in like an idiot Gryffindor and destroy his magic, then that's his choice. I say we let the fool go right ahead. Maybe once he is done, there can be some peace around here again." Snape sneered at him. Harry had to fight to keep from rolling his eyes, but he was only now realizing that all of the staff were looking at him, as were 3/4 of the students. Dumbledore visibly deflated as he gave in and called on a house elf to retrieve the Goblet of Fire from his office. Then with a flick of his wand, he created a small table in front of the staff dining table. When the house elf got back, she placed the cup on the small table. Harry nodded to Dumbledore and then turned to address the students. "As you all know, as a Triwizard champion, I have a contract with the Goblet of Fire, as do the head teachers of the 3 schools. What many of you may not realize is that all of you in this room also have a contract with the Goblet when the head teachers signed their schools up for this event. You are all part of the school that was signed up. There is almost nothing you are required to do, so this is mostly just a quirk of magical contracts. However, there is one clause that students can fall afoul of, and that's not to interfere with the tasks." Everyone was listening to Harry now. "As you have all probably heard, I was poisoned almost 2 weeks ago. Despite what anyone has heard, this was an attempt on my life, and as a dead champion can't compete in a task, this counts as interference." There were stunned looks on most of the faces. Harry glanced at Malfoy and noticed the little shit was wearing a smirk that basically telegraphed to Harry that he had done it, and thought that his use of the Imperious Curse left him untouchable. Harry turned back to the Goblet of Fire. "Goblet of Fire, I, Harry James Potter, champion of the Triwizard Tournament, ask you to render judgment. It is my belief that a student of one of the schools of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons or Durmstrang, did attempt to cheat by bringing about my death before the end of the final task." Once Harry finished talking, he stepped up to the Goblet of Fire, the flame of which had just turned black, and pulled his potions knife from his pocket. After pricking his thumb, he let a single drop of blood fall into the cup. As soon as the blood touched the fire, it jumped out of the goblet to about 3.5 feet over the surface. Then it turned pure white. When Harry was in his last year in Little Winging Junior School, he and all the other students had taken a tour of the local comprehensive school. It was just an orientation for the incoming students. But when they were being shown the science labs, the science teacher had decided to impress everyone by burning a strip of magnesium in a Bunsen burner. The light from the fire over the goblet reminded Harry of that, brilliantly white and almost impossible to look at due to its brightness. As Harry was bathed in the light, he could feel the magic of the goblet reach into him and judge him. What it was looking for Harry wasn't sure at first, but then he was replaying some of his memories connected to the tournament. First was him giving Cedric a warning about the dragons after he had confirmed that the other champions knew about them. Then it was him giving Fleur his copy of the clue for the second task. Harry was a little worried now that the goblet could easily take those instances as cheating. However, he soon felt a rush of approval coming from what he now realized was a fire spirit of some type, a spirit that seemed to think Harry's actions were fair to the other champions. Next, he had to relive his experience of being poisoned. The spirit definitely didn't seem to like that, but when it withdrew from Harry, he could tell that there was no danger to him anymore. From next to Harry, there was a little "oh" from Hermione as the spirit examined her, and then there were little sounds of surprise from almost everyone in the hall as the spirit searched for who had tried to kill Harry. For almost everyone, there were also little sounds of relief or curiosity, but from Malfoy there was a scream of terror. "No, please no, please no." Malfoy called as he was lifted into the air by an unseen magic, leaving him floating at the same height as the ball of fire that was floating over the goblet. The area above the Slytherin filled with a dense cloud of white smoke, and almost like the smoke was a projection screen, Malfoy's memories started playing out over the surface. The first memory was Snape handing Malfoy a book and telling Malfoy to be careful with it, as there were dangerous potions in the book, and that he needed to keep the book hidden because it was banned in Hogwarts to any student not studying NEWT level antidotes. The second was Malfoy brewing a potion. The third was him sneaking into the stockroom in the Three Broomsticks, and when Madame Rosmerta came to investigate what she thought was a Hogwarts student trying to steal a bottle of fire whiskey, Malfoy hit her with an imperious curse, gave her a vial of poison, and told her to make sure it ended up in Harry Potter's drink. Then he slipped out of the back room, ordered a drink, and sat down in a corner and watched as Harry and Hermione came into the pub and ordered drinks and food. Then he watched as Harry drank the poison-laced drink. Everyone got to watch Harry as he started to choke, then foam at the mouth, Hermione desperately doing everything she could to keep him alive. The real Hermione buried her head into Harry's chest, the images of Harry's near miss with death distressing her. Harry put his arms around her and ignored the rest of the hall as he reassured her that he was okay. Everyone else was now looking at Malfoy, and apart from a few holdouts in Slytherin, they were all looking at him like he was something disgusting they had trodden on in care of magical creatures class. Even the people who didn't particularly like Harry were horrified that Malfoy had used an unforgivable on Madame Rosmerta, someone that was almost universally liked by the students' third year and up. Snape snapped at Harry. "Potter, you have proved your point. End this now or I will have you in detention for the rest of your time in this school." Harry turned to the irate professor. "There is nothing I can do. This is out of my hands now. And maybe if you hadn't given him a how-to guide on making poisons, then this wouldn't have happened." Harry's words were cold and calm. "Who do yo?" Snape started yelling at Harry, but he was cut off by another scream from Malfoy. The fireball was no longer floating over the goblet, but flying straight at Malfoy. It flew directly into the Slytherin, but instead of striking him, it flew into his chest and was almost absorbed into his chest. The Goblet of Fire had determined that Malfoy was guilty of interfering in the tournament, and now his magic was now forfeit. A part of Harry was disgusted with himself for doing this to someone, but another, bigger part of him was thinking about the bigot's attempts to kill Dumbledore. How he had hospitalized Katie, almost poisoned Ron, led a gang of Death Eaters and Fenrir Greyback into a school, and now used an unforgivable to try and murder him, all for a belief that his blood status made him better than other people. Taking his magic was justice. Less than a minute later, Malfoy fell unconscious, and the fire, now back to its regular blue, emerged from Malfoy's chest and floated back into the cup that was its home. As soon as the fire touched the goblet, whatever magic that was holding Malfoy in the air ended, and the blonde git crashed to the floor. The whole room was silent now, looking at either Harry or Malfoy. Harry went to walk out of the great hall, as the excitement had ruined his appetite, and he just wanted to leave. But Dumbledore stood up and shouted, "Mr. Potter, my office now." Chapter 17. Chapter text, Chapter 17. Harry was now sitting in the headmaster's office, while a bunch of adults shouted at him and each other. Professors McGonagall and Snape had both come along, and as soon as they were there, Snape had stuck his head in the fire and called Draco's mother and the head of the DMLE. Both had rushed to the school after Snape had told them that Harry Potter had just stolen the magic from Draco Malfoy. Only Narcissa Malfoy had called the Minister of Magic first, and the man had come running as well, drawing his pink toad with him. Now Fudge was calling for Harry to get the Dementors. Kiss, Umbridge, and Snape were egging him on. Narcissa was weeping for her son. Professor McGonagall and Director Bones were trying to get everyone to calm enough to actually get the full story. And Dumbledore was sitting at his desk, silently staring at Harry like he had just killed a puppy. This is a travesty. I will see justice done for this outrage. He was the last of a pureblood line that has been a part of Britain's magical society for hundreds of years. It will have to be the Dementors, Kiss. Fudge was shouting at the top of his voice. Quite right, Minister. Public execution. Bare minimum. Umbridge was failing to hide her glee. The boy has been nothing but a troublemaker since he got here. If the headmaster had actually expelled him when I asked, then this would never have happened, said Snape as he tried to stir the pot even more. Oh, shut up, Severus. The only thing Mr. Potter has done is to stand up for himself when Malfoy antagonized him. If you had actually disciplined the boy instead of letting him off, then maybe Malfoy would have grown up. McGonagall snapped at Snape. With all the arguing around him, finally Harry had had enough. Shut up, all of you, and listen. I am the Minister of Magic, and I will not be talked to this way. If you don't listen, you won't be Minister for Magic much longer, because the headline in the Prophet will read Omething like Cornelius Fudge wrongfully executes boy who lived. How long do you think you could survive as Minister after a headline like that? Do you think you'd make it a full week? Aye, but preposterous. You broke laws. No, Minister, I didn't. And if you actually listen, you will understand, but to do that you need to shut up. The man did, and when Snape tried to jump on Harry, calling him an arrogant something or other, he was unable to finish as Director Bone hit him with a silencing charm, since she actually wanted to listen to Harry's side. You all know of the attempt on my life, where I was poisoned by an Imperiused Madame Rosmata. Harry paused, and everyone nodded. Well, under the laws that govern the Triwizard Tournament, no member of the host school can try to prevent a selected champion from competing. This was added in the 13th tournament to prevent students from the host school sabotaging foreign competitors, though was written to include all champions and not just the foreign ones. If there was such an attempt, a champion can ask the goblet to render judgment. Now petty things like badges, chance, or tripping jinxes wouldn't be enough. For the goblet to act, the person must have done something such as try to kidnap, permanently injure, or kill a champion. Draco Malfoy put the imperious curse on Madame Rosmata and forced her to try and kill me, and we all saw the evidence. The cup displayed Malfoy's memories of casting the curse to every student, professor, and visitor in the Great Hall before rendering its judgment. So, Minister, not only was it completely legal, and I have copies of the relevant laws ready to be sent out to every paper and radio show in magical Britain by people I trust, it was also the Goblet of Fire that took his magic, and not me. And there is no way for you to keep it quiet that Malfoy was the one who tried to murder me using an unforgivable curse. Given these facts, Minister, how do you feel about that Dementor's kiss now? The Minister prevaricated for a bit before conceding that he might have been a little hasty. Narcissa Malfoy had been crying the whole time since she had heard from Dumbledore that her son had been stripped of his magic. Harry had to give the woman one thing: she loved her son. Now that it looked like the Minister was ready to walk away from the situation, though, she jumped up. But Minister, Draco is the last of his line. Without him, the Malfoy name will die out. There are laws that punish anyone who ends a line like this. Bullshit, Harry shouted at the top of his voice. Your little shitbag of a son is guilty of an unforgivable curse and attempted murder. That is a mandatory life sentence in Azkaban, not much chance to sire an heir there. But as he no longer has magic, I'm sure you can bribe enough people to reclassify him as a muggle to keep him out of there. If he were to marry a witch and have magical children, then they can continue the magical house of Malfoy. This way the brat can still try and make something of himself, instead of dying from Dementor exposure. Harry's words didn't exactly have a calming effect on Narcissa Malfoy, who instead lunged at him. Her long nails caught his face, leaving 3 bloody scratch marks on his cheek before the woman was stunned by Director Bones. Harry agreed with the director when she suggested that pressing charges for Narcissa's attack on him was a bad idea, and after a quick bit of field healing from the former aura, the stinging feeling in his cheek died down to barely noticeable. Narcissa was revived, and Snape was volunteered by Dumbledore to escort the woman to the hospital wing where she could see her son. The two left, but not before Snape unloaded another barrel load of his vitriol on Harry. There was still more arguing and debating to be done in the headmaster's office, and over the next couple of hours, it was decided that Harry would go to the DMLE and give his statements, and Director Bones would stay in the school and do a fast preliminary investigation. If everything was as Harry had said, then he would be returned to the castle that night while the Auras did a more in-depth investigation. If the quick investigation threw up any red flags, then Harry would be spending his time in a DMLE holding cell during the investigation. As he had thought, Harry was back in the castle by 10 o'clock that night and found a worried but very relieved Hermione once she saw him. As he expected, he had to deal with one of Hermione's rib crackers she called hugs before being subjected to what felt like a million questions. Harry carried Hermione over to one of the sofas and sat there answering as many of her questions as he could, telling her what had happened from his point of view. Honestly, Hermione, it was nothing. They had to wait for Sirius to get there before they could ask me any questions. And once he was there, I just told them about finding the right in our reading of the Triwizard rules and laws, and how I invoked the goblet to test the Hogwarts students. There were a load of clarification questions, and I had to go over everything about 6 times, but eventually Director Bones got back to the DMLE, and after she talked with the people who were interviewing me, they quickly decided to send me back here. There will still be a full investigation, as we guessed, but we know that won't turn up anything. What happened here? Well, Madam Bones and another Aura selected me, and a bunch of students who were of age, and interviewed us. They wanted to know what the of age students saw exactly, and they wanted the full story from me. They just asked us each questions in the Transfiguration classroom. Hermione explained her part. Why only of age students? Harry asked. Professor McGonagall had to sit with me just as Sirius needed to sit with you, but no need to worry about that if the person you are asking is of age. Hermione shifted as she spoke, so she was now using his lap as a pillow. As they let me go, I'm guessing that everything went smoothly here. Hermione nodded as her only response. The two quickly found that sleep was overtaking them, and without a conscious thought, decided to spend the night right where they were. Harry drew his wand, and with a few waves his feet were now elevated on a padded footrest. The back of the sofa he was sat on was transfigured to lean back like a recliner. There were a bunch more logs on the nearest fire, and a blanket found its way over Hermione. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. The next few days were hectic. The darker students were terrified of Harry, afraid that he could do to them what he had done to Malfoy, whereas the lighter students, while cautious, thought that what Harry had done was justified. The DMLE were of course there, going over everything, doing their investigation, but it seemed that the investigators agreed with Harry and Hermione's interpretation of the law. What they had done was legal, though Harry wouldn't be surprised to hear that more than half of the investigators signed a motion to update the laws to make it illegal in the future. A bunch of unspeakables also came to examine the Goblet of Fire. They didn't say it, but Harry suspected that they wanted to discover if Malfoy's magic could be returned to him, or if it could be given to someone else. Harry doubted that. If he was right, then the fire spirit that lived in the cup had eaten the magic, and it no longer existed as a separate entity to the spirit. The best part happened the day after Harry had turned Malfoy into a squib. Harry and Hermione were walking around the castle, avoiding the attention from the rest of the school, when suddenly there was a popping sound, and Darby appeared in front of them. In less than a second, the elf had grabbed onto his legs and was joyfully saying, "Thank you," repeatedly. "Darby, what happened?" Hermione asked the elf, as Harry was too surprised to do anything. "Harry Potter is saving Darby. First Harry Potter is killing Bad Master, then Darby started, but Harry quickly covered the elf's mouth with his hand, and after looking around to see if there was anyone around, they pulled the elf into a nearby out-of-use office. As soon as the door was closed, Hermione started casting every privacy ward she knew. Once she was done, she nodded to Harry, who removed his hand from Darby's mouth and asked, "Darby, what makes you think I killed Lucius Malfoy?" Darby looked at Harry confused. "Darby is knowing because Darby was there. Darby is watching as the great Harry Potter, sir, is stopping old bad master." That worried Harry and Hermione. They had both thought that being under the cloak had protected them from being seen. "Darby, can you tell me exactly what you saw?" Harry asked. "Darby is not seeing anything. Darby is feeling it. Mr. Harry Potter, sir, and his granny was being stealthy, and when Bad Master was hurting Muggles, Harry Potter, sir, stopped Bad Master from ever hurting Darby again." Darby was looking nervous now. "Did any other elves sense what we did?" Hermione asked openly. There was no point in pretending now. "Darby is not thinking so, but even if they did, they is not knowing how the great Harry Potter says magic feels, so they is not knowing it is you." That caused the two teens to sigh in relief, sensing that he was in the clear now. Darby continued, "And now you has freed me from young bad master. Darby is free. But Draco is still alive. Wouldn't you still be bound to him?" Harry asked. Darby shook his head excitedly. "Bond is requiring magic. No magic, no bond." "I would have thought it would transfer to Narcissa then." Hermione questioned. "If young bad master be's dying, then yes, mistress would be inheriting Darby. But young bad master is still alive, so no inheritance, but bond also broken, so Darby is free." The little elf started dancing as he said he was free. Harry suddenly had an idea. "Darby, why don't you work for me? I'll even pay you 5 galleons a week." If Darby worked for Harry, then he could order the little guy to never talk to anyone about how Harry had killed Lucius. The elf lit up at that, but decided he would negotiate his pay. 1 nut a month. The two negotiated for 20 minutes before they settled on 5 galleons a month, and Darby was required to spend 1 day a week not working. Hermione tried to persuade Darby to accept higher offers, but he outright refused to even consider what Hermione wanted to pay him, 10 galleons and 2 days off a week. Secretly, Harry was happy about that. Not that Darby didn't deserve it, but Harry was still in school, and paying that much for anything when he didn't have a job would be difficult. Harry had enough gold on him to pay for the elf's first month. As soon as the elf was officially in his employment, he said, "Right, Darby, while you work for me, you must never mention to anyone that I killed Lucius. I'm serious. I could get into big trouble for that." The elf nodded, and Harry smiled at him. "Thank you, Darby." After 2 days, Harry had his first lesson with Snape since the incident, and it was enough to prove that Snape, while unable to punish Harry for what he had done to Malfoy, was set on punishing Harry as much as possible. Harry was the last one into the dungeon, but only by about half a second as he walked in with everyone else. That didn't seem to matter, as Snape snapped out as soon as he walked in the door, "Potter, 10 points from Gryffindor for being late to class." That set the tone for the rest of the lesson. "Potter, 10 points for disrupting the class," when Harry sneezed. "Potter, 10 points for an untidy uniform," when Harry's shirt became untucked as he reached for an ingredient on a higher shelf. When Harry had replied, "Yes, sir," Snape's response was, "and another 10 for talking back to a teacher." When Harry didn't say anything at the next point loss, 10 points for chopping his ingredients in the wrong order when it was the order they went into the potion that mattered, Snape barked out, and another 10 points for ignoring a professor when they're speaking to you. By the end of the lesson, Harry had lost 120 points for Gryffindor, but if he was honest, Harry didn't care. He had much more important things to focus on rather than the House Cup. The third task was approaching, and with it, Harry's shot at Voldemort and ending this before it had even really begun. Yes, he couldn't kill Voldemort until they had tracked down Hufflepuff's cup, but being alive and being able to lead a bunch of bigots in a war were completely different things. However, with the exception of Hermione, Harry's feelings on the matter seemed to hold no sway in the decision of the rest of the Gryffindor fourth years. As a whole, they went and complained to Professor McGonagall about Snape's unfair treatment, so the professor had no choice but to call Harry to her office and hear his side of the story. After she had offered Harry his pick from a tin of Scottish short-end biscuits, she had him recount his experience with Professor Snape. "Well, after I was on time for class, he docked 10 points for me being late. Professor McGonagall jumped in and asked, "Just what do you mean you were on time? I need more details." Well, I was queuing up outside the classroom with all the other students waiting for Professor Snape to open the door. The whole class walked in, each person only a second or two behind the one in front of them, and while I was the last in the queue, it was less than a minute after he had opened the door. Half the class was still finding their seats, and in no way an unreasonable time to enter the classroom. Harry explained in detail, and Professor McGonagall took notes. They were there for over an hour, going over every single point lost from that lesson, and got almost all of them overturned. Even the ones that weren't overturned, like the one for the untucked shirt that he was technically guilty of, were reduced to a more reasonable level, most commonly a single point. There was one unfair point loss, though, that Professor McGonagall didn't touch, and he couldn't stop grinning when she told him, why then swore him to secrecy. Snape was in a rage as he stormed through the castle. Students with red, yellow, and blue-trimmed robes started out of his way, and while normally he would take a vindictive pleasure in that, this time he was far too focused on his destination. Once he reached the door he was looking for, he banged quite harshly on it. However, the way he conveyed his anger was in stark contrast to the calm voice that called out, "Come in, Severus." He threw the door open and stormed into the office, finding Minerva McGonagall sitting behind her desk looking at him. "Do you want to explain to me why I have half of my Slytherins in the common room complaining about you taking points from Slytherin unfairly?" He struggled not to shout at the woman who was both his professional superior and someone who was his teacher when he was in school. "I have no clue what you mean, Severus," she said calmly, and Snape was too agitated to notice she was holding back a smirk. "Surely your band of attention-seeking troublemakers are just complaining about justly deserved punishments. How are these punishments justly deserved?" Snape was losing his battle with himself not to shout, because they all need their egos deflating. Bullshit, and even if that were true, that's no excuse to dock points from students for being late to class when they were on time. "Oh, but isn't that the same standard you set in your class? If you can behave that way to Mr. Potter and my Gryffindors, then I can and will do the same to your Slytherins." Snape reared back as though Professor McGonagall had slapped him. "Potter is," he started, but Professor McGonagall cut him off. "Mr. Potter is one of the quietest, most studious students in the school, and while he is far from perfect, he has done nothing to warrant this kind of treatment from you. He stole my godson's magic. Your godson tried to kill him. Perhaps if you had done your job properly and actually punished Mr. Malfoy for his rule-breaking and bullying, then he wouldn't have thought of using unforgivable magic to attempt the murder of a student that had done nothing to him. If that same student hadn't watched you do everything in your power to bully Mr. Potter by constantly taking points when it wasn't deserved, then maybe he wouldn't have thought bullying Mr. Potter was acceptable. This entire situation is something you could have prevented, Severus, if you had only done your job, rather than trying to take revenge on a child for what the father whom the boy doesn't even remember did to you at school. Now grow the fuck up, go return the points you took from Mr. Potter, and publicly, just like when you took them, apologize to him, then I will restore the points to your Slytherin students. Now, get the hell out of my office." Snape retreated from the office, and McGonagall closed the door with a flick of her wand, then slumped down in her chair. It took her a few minutes to calm down after blowing up at her colleague, but as she thought back on it, she smiled a little. That man had had that coming for years. Chapter 18. Chapter text, Chapter 18. Bagman called the 4 champions down to the Quidditch pitch that evening, and as soon as Harry saw the mass of small shrubs that were covering the Quidditch pitch, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He and Hermione had done everything they could to keep the timeline running parallel to the one they remembered, but they had made some big changes, and they feared that those may have had a butterfly effect on some things they needed to remain the same, including the maze. That was the last thing they needed to keep the same, and the task couldn't be changed now, so it was finally time for the gloves to come off. Harry looked at the pitch as he walked up with the other champions and decided he was going to ruin Bagman's fun after what he tried to do to Fleur. Before the man could say anything, Harry called out, "I see you're building a maze. Let me guess. It's going to be filled with creatures, traps, spells, and anything you can think of to slow us down." The cup will be in the middle, and the first one to get it receives full marks and wins the tournament. He watched as Bagman deflated, his chance to bask in the spotlight, even for a few moments, going up in smoke. Ah, yes, that's it. You'll enter the maze in order of your points. Mr. Potter, you will go in first. You have a 10-point lead on Mr. Crumb, so you will have 3 minutes and 20 seconds alone in the maze. That's where Mr. Crumb will enter, followed by Mr. Diggory 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, which is precisely 7 minutes after Mr. Potter. Finally, Mr. Lacker, you will enter the maze 4 minutes and 40 seconds after Mr. Diggory, or 11 minutes and 40 seconds after Mr. Potter. Harry was annoyed that the judges had changed the value of the points, as he had been hoping to have a lot more time alone in the maze. But the judges probably didn't think that almost 40 minutes between Harry entering the maze and Fleur entering the maze would give the other champions a fair shot, and they had awarded only 20 seconds for every point. Bagman asked if there were any questions, and then dismissed the champions, and they all returned to the school in time for dinner. Harry checked the map to see if Barty had turned up like he did last time, but he hadn't. His and Hermione's best guess was that Senior was either currently under the imperious of his son, who was a better wizard than Pettigrew, and was able to keep the man under control a lot better, or he was being kept a prisoner, and his son was polyjuicing again, but this time as his father. Unfortunately, they had no way to confirm either way, and if it was polyjuice, then capturing the man early would not only disrupt the plan for Harry's kidnapping, but it would also leave a suddenly expendable Crouch in Voldemort's hands. Not that Harry could bring himself to feel much sympathy for the man who had locked Harry's innocent godfather up for over a decade for a crime he was innocent of. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry spent the last month before the maze practicing for after the maze, rather than for it as most people assumed. The morning of the task, he was busy testing his pumpkin juice for potions or poisons. After the incident in the Three Broomsticks, both Harry and Hermione had gotten more than a little paranoid. He was so focused on casting his detection spells that he didn't notice the man walk up behind him until he put his hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry spun around to see who it was and was confronted with the grinning face of his godfather. "Sirius, what are you doing here? The champion's family are invited to spend the day with them," an overeager and obviously happy Sirius told him. Harry had forgotten about this part. With Harry and Hermione avoiding Ron, their friendship with the rest of the Weasleys hadn't formed like last time, and because he wasn't close to the Weasleys, Harry realized they wouldn't be coming. However, Harry still fell back into thinking of Sirius as the escaped man on the run who couldn't risk going places or doing anything in public. Harry put it out of his mind. Hermione wanted to spend the day with Harry as well, but it was exam time at Hogwarts, and unlike him, she wasn't excused from tests. So Harry and Sirius just strode around the grounds and chatted. "So what's the opinion of the public over me making Malfoy a squib?" Harry asked. Sirius grimaced. "Well, some people think you let him off lightly. They remember that he used an unforgivable spell and tried to kill you and think he should suffer in Azkaban. Almost none of these people have met Malfoy. Those who have are in agreement that losing his magic is far worse for him." Harry understood that. It was part of why using the goblet was so appealing over their alternate plan to slip the prick Veritaserum at dinner and ask him how he did it. Draco without his magic was a nobody. The boy had no clue how to do anything without his wand and was too bigoted to learn. A bunch of people think you got it right by allowing an old family to keep going rather than destroying it. In fact, I hear Draco is already inundated with marriage offers, but Narcissa is sitting on them at the moment, as they all seem to require Draco to surrender the head of house duty to his wife, and for his wife to assume financial control of the Malfoy estate. That the girls in the contract would eventually be puppets for their fathers means that Draco is basically looking at becoming some pureblood princess, new toy, while someone else gets his family's wealth. The old pureblood faction sounds like they are out for your blood. The idea that you stole the magic from a pureblood echoes a lot of the hippogriff crap that you know who used to say. I wouldn't be too concerned. They lost a lot of support at the World Cup when a bunch of them were captured after they were hit with that stray exploding curse. Sirius finished up his explanation. Harry sighed before speaking. So pretty much nothing has changed, except that the people who never liked me have a response to be loud about it now. The more things change, the more they stay the same, he thought to himself. Eventually, Harry was called down to the task, and he and Hermione walked down together. Harry handed her a backpack that he had stuffed a few things in, and she took it wordlessly. Once they were near the Quidditch pitch, Hermione was the one to break the silence. "Harry, do we really need to do this?" The nerves were evident in her voice. Harry didn't really want to do this either. "What other choice do we have?" he asked. Hermione bit her lip nervously before saying, "We could leave. Just disappear and let magical Britain deal with its own problems. We could go anywhere, well, anywhere they speak English. America or Australia are both big enough to get really lost in. We could have a life, no more war and fighting, just you and me and normal lives." Harry understood, he really did. Even if they had been preparing for this for almost 4 years, it was still nerve-wracking, and some cold feet were enviable. "I would lose my magic," Harry answered simply. "Fuck your magic. You're not Malfoy, both of us could get by without it. I'll make you a deal. If you lose yours, I'll never use mine again." Hermione sounded passionate. That Hermione has sworn said more about how serious she was than the fact that she said she would give up her magic. She only swore when she was absolutely serious, and this told Harry that unless he could convince Hermione to stay quickly, they would probably be in Australia by morning. "Hermione, we can't. If we run, Voldemort will never stop hunting us, and as good as we are, he would find us eventually, and then I wouldn't have magic to fight with, and you'd be out of practice. And what about the people we leave here? Not the public in general, people who constantly turn on me," Harry added as he saw the look on her face. "But what about Neville, or Luna, or even Professor McGonagall? What would we be condemning them to if we left?" Harry could see that Hermione agreed with him even if she didn't want to. She pulled him into a hug. "Just promise me you are going to come back. Whatever happens, I don't care if you have to just let him escape. You promise you will come back to me." Harry just wrapped her up in his arms. "Of course I'm coming back. I'll always come back to you." Hermione reluctantly let Harry go, and after checking that she was still holding Harry's backpack, she gave Harry a quick kiss and went to sit in the stands with Sirius. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Harry was standing in front of a huge crowd. The stands were packed, not just with students, but with any wizard or witch who felt like coughing up the 5 galleons the ministry was charging to come and watch the task. Given how little they would see, Harry wondered how many of them would demand the return of their gold. Bagman was doing his thing, warming up the crowd by going over what had happened during the first 2 tasks. Harry noticed Fleur's jaw clench as Bagman talked about her attempts at the first task. Understandable, as the way he talked Fleur had screwed up rather than Bagman sabotaging her. Harry still didn't know if that had been intentional. Unfortunately, he was greedy enough to have cheated, but also stupid enough to do it accidentally. Finally, it was time for the task to begin, and Crouch called them all together for one last talk before they entered the maze. "Now, you all know that all you need to do is reach the center of the maze and touch the cup. The cup is a portkey that will bring the winner to the judge's platform. There are a number of dangers in there that could become deadly if you don't use your head, so stay alert. However, if at any point you are in trouble, then all you need to do is send up red sparks, and you will be extracted from the maze. Be aware that if you are extracted, you will receive 0 points for the task. I wish you all the best of luck." He nodded to each of them and left to sit at the judge's table. Nerves started to get to Harry, and he missed most of what was being said around him. In a few minutes he would enter the maze, and even without the looming threat of Voldemort at the end, the maze was the most nerve-wracking task. For the first 2 you could plan, and Harry had a reasonable idea of what was coming his way. The maze, however, had random beasts everywhere. There was no real planning, just a list of goals and guesswork. 10, 9, 8. Bagman started the count, and soon the crowd joined in. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then there was a loud bell, and Harry ran forward. As soon as he was inside the maze, he stopped, turned around, and summoned his backpack from Hermione. He put it on before turning and entering the maze, the hedgerows quickly muffling the muttering that his summoning had generated in the crowd. Right, left, straight, T-junction, right, 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 left, crossroad straight on, right, left, dead end, back to the crossroad, left this time. It continued like this for what felt like between 5 or 10 minutes until there was a loud bell, and Harry knew that Crumb had now entered the maze. A few minutes later, Harry came across his first obstacle. He was lucky that this was one he had faced last time, so he knew exactly what the mist was. There was a charm to dispel it, but Harry didn't bother. It would just take time he didn't want to waste. He just ran through the mist, and for the second time he experienced the sensation of gravity reversing. It was just an illusion to make anybody in the mist feel that way, disorientating but not crippling when you expected it. Harry ran straight through. More turns, choices of path, and dead ends followed, and soon Harry ran into something new. There was a set of wrought iron gates that were closed and wouldn't open. However, where the lock was normally, there was an inscribed question. Why is it impossible to conjure food, but possible to increase the quantity of food you already have by magic? Harry grinned. This was a post-NEWT question, but one he knew from a Hermione lecture in the tent after Ron had left. Food was, chemically speaking at least, complex. Complex chains of amino acids in very specific orders and folded in just the right way, and you would get just one of the proteins in the steak you were trying to conjure. Not impossible as far as magic was concerned. That you could increase the amount of food you already have was proof of that, but impossible for a human to hold detailed enough information in their heads to conjure what they want. Increasing the amount of food bypassed the need for people to need a detailed understanding of what they were creating, the original being used as a template. Harry gave his answer to the gate, and it swung open for him, though it shut again as soon as he was through, with a handle on this side to open the door again if he wanted to. He continued on. He ran into one of Hagrid's scroots and quietly decided that he wasn't going to be gentle. He didn't want that thing coming up behind him later. As the scroot charged at him, Harry did a quick transfiguration in the ground under it, flipping the scroot on its back and exposing its unarmored underside. Sectum Sempra. The dark curse tore through the flesh of the scroot, and Harry didn't stick around to listen to its cries of pain or to watch it die. He took no pleasure in what he did, but at the same time didn't feel bad about it either. The things were crazy and dangerous. They should all be destroyed. The flock of Cornish pixies that he came across next he was far more gentle with, just immobilizing them the same way Hermione had in their second year and rushing past them. More turns and choices, and Harry came across something that reminded him of the portable swamp the Weasley twins would develop in a few years. There were stepping stones through it, and Harry was just about to try and jump from one to the next to get across when he realized he was being stupid. He conjured some thick wooden boards and laid them over the stones like a bridge. He wasn't at all surprised when a few of the stones turned out to be fake and the board passed right through them. He was surprised, though, when as soon as the board touched the swampy mud, it was sucked straight under. Harry made a mental note to stay away from the mud and finished building his bridge. He stopped for 2 minutes for a breather after he passed, pulling a bottle of Lucozade out and drinking about half of it before returning the bottle to the bag. He considered leaving the bridge there, but if any of the other champions were caught in it, then he doubted they would be seriously hurt, and it would keep them from facing the graveyard, so he vanished the wood planks. Harry did meet the Sphinx again, and she was just as polite as the first time, though this time she had a new riddle. What is so fragile that saying its name breaks it? That stumped Harry for longer than he would care to admit. He and the Sphinx stood there for almost 5 minutes while he puzzled it out, but eventually he got it. Silence. Correct, young one. You're close to your goal. I suggest you hurry. She told him after he had given his answer. Harry thanked her and gave her a riddle that he had prepared as a parting gift on the off chance he met the Sphinx again. A lifeless cripple who likes to run, who always waging war against the sun, always drawn. Never dry I feast on earth. Born in sky I'm life's best friend. What am I? Harry pulled a folded-up bit of parchment from his bag that was sealed with wax. In case I can't see you again before you leave, that contains the answer. He knew the Sphinx would only open it to confirm if her answer was right, never to find the answer. It was the nature of Sphinx. They loved riddles, and if this one took her a long time to answer, then she would prize it all the more. Harry moved past the Sphinx and continued along the path, cautious because he remembered what lay beyond here. As he was looking for it specifically, he saw it before it saw him. While it only took a second more for the acromantula to see him, in that second Harry's wand was already halfway up, and the spell was already forming in his mind. Incendio. The fire burst forth from Harry's wand and engulfed the spider and the hedge behind it. This created two problems. The first caused Harry to mentally start calling himself an idiot. Just because something is on fire doesn't make it dead, and Harry now had a giant, flaming, passed-off spider that, while it would probably die of its wounds, seemed determined to take Harry to hell with it. The second problem was Harry's spell had opened up a section of the maze walk, and through it Harry could see Crumb, and Crumb could see the cup. The Durmstrang champion wasn't able to get through the hedge yet, but he was pouring water on the flames from his wand, so it wouldn't be long. Harry's first task was going to have to be dealing with the spider. By deal with, he of course meant dodge as the spider tried to kill him, because it was leaping at him. Harry ducked back around the corner he had just come around, and the acromantula took a mouthful of leaves. While it was pulling itself out of the hedge, Harry stepped back around and hit it with another spell, Confringo. The blasting hex sent the flaming spider reeling away from him and towards the flaming hole that was almost extinguished enough for Crumb to climb through. Harry hit the spider again, pushing it so that it was half in the hole and half out, then decided that he didn't have time to go with his original plan and ran towards the cup, only to hear a spell he was all too familiar with come from behind the spider. Avada Kedavra. There was a flash of green light, and the spider stopped fighting as it fell limp. It was then blasted out of the way, and Crumb climbed through the hole in the hedge, while Harry stood there shocked. He had never thought Crumb knew and would use such dark magic. Crumb saw Harry staring at him, horrified by what he had just done, and scoffed at him. What I did was far kinder than setting the bloody thing on fire. It was quick and clean. It was dark magic, Harry said, his horror giving way to anger. And that was a dark creature that would have killed us given the chance, Crumb replied. Look, Potter, I understand that you have a history with that spell, but I need you to understand this quickly. I don't use that spell except under exceptional circumstances, and I have no intention of using that spell on you or anyone you care about. However, he raised his wand and sent a non-verbal red jet of red magic at Harry. If they had been any closer, Crumb might have hit, but Harry had good reflexes and dove to the side, avoiding the spell. However, Crumb had been taught how to fight a wizard's duel, a structured fight with rules and accepted practice. Harry had learned how to fight a war. The main difference between the two was that in one you stood your ground and put up a shield. If you moved at all, you never strayed more than maybe 6 feet from where you started. In the other you moved. You didn't put up a shield unless you had to, because it takes time and magic. Dodging let you cast more offensive spells, and even the spell that broke through shields mostly did nothing if they didn't hit you. So as Harry dove to his left, avoiding the silent, maybe a stunner, he was already sending his own spell back at Crumb, a silent Expelliarmus. Crumb got his shield up just in time, so Harry sent his next spell at the ground just in front of the shield. Reducto. The spell slammed into the dirt, and the dirt exploded out from under Crumb's feet. It wasn't strong enough to do any damage, but it did cause the Bulgarian to stumble. Harry used Crumb's distracted state to hit him with a stunning spell. Harry got up and dusted off his robes, then went to go and examine Crumb. The international Quidditch star looked no worse for wear, and Harry considered the other boys' words. He could see where Crumb could make that argument, but he was wrong. The emotional component for the spell made it a double-edged sword, because if you need the hate for the power, the more you look for reasons to hate. Before long you find them, and you get positive feedback by more power in your spells, and slowly that emotion becomes a bigger part of your personality. It wasn't magic, just the psychology of positive reinforcement, but that didn't keep it from being dangerous. With Crumb unconscious, Harry had a minute, so he opened his backpack up and pulled out his invisibility cloak, though he also pulled out the last of the bottle of Lucozade and finished it off. He vanished the empty bottle and then pulled his invisibility cloak around his shoulders, then strode up to the Triwizard Trophy, the portkey that would send him to a place he wanted to be and a place he wanted to avoid for as long as possible. The problem was that he had no more time to prepare. It was time, once more, unto the breach. A part of him wondered where that quote was from. If he made it back, he would have to ask Hermione. He reached out and clasped the handle of the trophy and felt the familiar hook behind his navel as he was wicked halfway across the country. Chapter 19. Chapter text, Chapter 19. One moment Harry felt like the world was a storm of wind and chaos, and the next second he slammed down in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. He didn't bother trying to keep his feet, instead using the fall to quickly move away from where he had landed in case there was a spell coming his way quickly. His instinct was right on the money, as Crouch shot a stunning spell right at where Harry landed, missing him by inches. As Harry was wearing his family's invisibility cloak, he quickly but cautiously started backing away from Crouch, making sure to put gravestones between them when he could. "Where are you, Potter? It's time for you to have your role in my master's rebirth." The man sounded half crazy, but Harry guessed that's what being kept a prisoner under the Imperious Curse for over a decade would do to you. Crouch started firing off stunners at random, and one flew right over Harry's head and would have hit him if he had been standing up, rather than crouching behind a gravestone as he tried to work out his plan. He could try taking Crouch out, but Harry knew that Wormtail, Lestrange, and Voldemort were also out there, and as soon as he used any kind of combat spell, he would give away his position with the light from the spell. He also couldn't just sit still, because the damned snake would be able to smell him. While they wouldn't kill him yet, they needed his blood after all. It wasn't part of Harry's plan for Voldemort to get a new body tonight. He looked around to see if he could spot Lestrange or Wormtail, suspecting that Bellatrix would be helping Crouch, because she was a better fighter than Wormtail, while someone would need to act as Voldemort's babysitter, since the bastard was still a weird baby. However, he couldn't see her, which meant she was probably disillusioned waiting for her opportunity to get him. One thing he did spot was the oversized cauldron where they planned to finish the potion. There was a figure over there doing something Harry couldn't make out from where he was, but he assumed it was Wormtail doing some last-minute adjustments to the potion. Harry then got an idea on how he could deal with Crouch without being spotted. He looked around the graveyard for a large rock and moved so that Crouch was directly between Harry and the rock, and silently summoned the rock, pouring as much magic into the spell as he could. The rock came flying and bounced off the back of Crouch, although Harry was able to get the angle to hit the man who was looking for him with some force on it. He couldn't control how high the rock flew. While Harry had a mental image of the rock hitting Crouch in the back of his head and knocking him out, in reality the stone hit Crouch in the back just below his left shoulder. Although there wasn't an unconscious or even a dead Crouch laid out on the ground, there was still a loud crack and a satisfying scream of pain from the man, followed by a string of swearing that was surprisingly creative. Sometimes Harry wondered if there was a higher power like fate on his side, or if he was just lucky. Of course, whenever he wondered that, he was often soon reminded that he had just as many, if not more, problems in his life as he had things go right. In this case, Harry just happened to look behind him and was lucky enough to see Nagini, Voldemort's snake and Horcrux, slithering along the ground as it came trying to find him. Harry didn't hesitate. He doubted that he would have another shot this good. He raised his wand and shouted Sectum Sempra as he flicked his wand across the body of the snake. A white light lanced from the tip of his wand and struck along the body of the snake, cutting a deep gash in its side. Blood started to spill from the wound, but Harry didn't have the time to appreciate taking down another Horcrux, as the flash of white light from his wand had told everyone else in the graveyard exactly where he was. He dove to the side, not even stopping to look around him, and avoided the stunner immediately thrown his way. With Crouch now knowing where he was, Harry had no reason to conceal where he was, so as he crouched behind a gravestone for cover, he called out, "So, Crouch, how long have you had your father under the Imperious? Was that how you got my name in the goblet?" "Oh, work that much out, did you? My father had me under the Imperious curse for over 12 years, 12 years of nothing, but staring at a wall or being forced to read books on why the Death Eaters were wrong. But during the commotion at the World Cup, his control slipped. I was able to snatch my father's wand from him, and from then on it was his turn to live as a slave. While Crouch was distracted, Harry crept clockwise around the man, hoping to get a clear shot. Did you know my master was there at the World Cup? Well, close by anyway. He had Auntie Bellatrix looking for an opportunity to grab you. Bella saw me only for a second when I opened my invisibility cloak to Imperio, my father, and she took me to our lord to tell him all about the Triwizard tournament that was planned. I was forced for years to listen to my father prattle on about what he was doing in the ministry, so I had years of intelligence to give to my lord, and my lord used it to craft his plan to catch you. Harry was still assessing the situation throughout Crouch's monologue. If he was far enough away from Crouch, then there was the chance that he could get a shield charm up in time. All Harry would have done then is give way his advantage, and he would then have to take Crouch in a straight duel. He had no clue how good a dueler Crouch was, but given he had once watched the man silently transfigure Malfoy into a ferret, he doubted the man would be an easy victory if Harry didn't take him by surprise. However, even invisible he could still be heard, and the grass under his feet could still be seen as it was compressed by his feet, so he had to be cautious. As for getting your name in the goblet, originally I was going to kidnap a teacher and replace them in the school. However, no opportunity presented itself, so we tasked my father with putting your name in the goblet. Your name was the first one entered. It was done even before the goblet of fire was in the school. Now why don't you give up like a good little boy? I even promise not to kill you. Harry had a dry mental laugh at that last line. Sure, Crouch wasn't going to try to kill him. Voldemort wanted that pleasure for himself. He was close enough now he raised his wand so only the tip would be poking out of the folds of his invisibility cloak, and thought, Petrificus Totalis, as hard as he could. Harry got lucky. The Death Eater's arms fell to his sides, his legs snapped together, and he fell forward, face planting into the hard earth that hadn't seen any rain for a few weeks with the rapid approach of summer. Harry squatted down next to the petrified Death Eater and looked him over, picking up the man's wand and pocketing it just in case, before saying, You talk too much. Then he stunned the man. Harry was starting to think that Bellatrix wasn't here. She hadn't attacked him yet, and she wasn't over with Voldemort and Wormtail. Wormtail was starting to look nervous and was looking around all twitchy, as he wasn't much of a fighter, and Voldemort would probably punish Wormtail if he failed. Little did Wormtail know it was Harry that the man had to be afraid of. Harry and Hermione had had long discussions over what Wormtail's fate should be. With Sirius already free and a kiss-on-sight order out for Wormtail, Harry had advocated hard for what Hermione had dubbed righteous vengeance. He wanted to end the man, preferably slowly and painfully. Hermione, on the other hand, had advocated for handing the man over to the DMLE. According to her, he would regret killing Wormtail after he had done it, not because the man didn't deserve it, but because it would change him in some way. Harry had agreed to consider Hermione's point of view, but he hadn't made a decision yet. A part of him really wanted to kill the man who had ratted out his parents to Voldemort, yet he trusted Hermione, and if anyone knew him better than he knew himself, it was her. A part of Harry wanted things to go wrong, for it to be a choice of Wormtail or him, just like it had been that first time with Quirrell. However, part of him still wondered if he had actually been the one to kill Quirrell. The burn he had given the man was bad, but he was sure Madame Pomfrey could have fixed it up. Burns, even painfully bad ones, were relatively simple to fix. Now that Harry was able to take the time to look, he could also see how agitated Tom was. Things weren't going according to the plans of the monster inside the body of a sickly toddler. Harry could try to sneak over there under his cloak and end this quickly, yet something was telling him that he shouldn't use the cloak for this. Instead, he dropped behind the large grave marker that had a statue of death on it, the very same one that he had been tied to this night years ago from his perspective. As he did, he felt his scar prickle, and he realized why using the cloak against Voldemort was a bad idea. If he could tell when Voldemort was near, and Voldemort had used that same connection to raid Harry's mind in the past, it was entirely possible Voldemort would know Harry was there. As if to confirm his suspicions, a voice broke the air just as Harry was reaching to pull off the cloak. Harry Potter, I know you are there. I can sense you. Come out and face your destiny. Harry couldn't help it, he laughed. With the prophecy and Voldemort still having a Horcrux in play, it was too early to be talking about destiny. He called out, 1 second, I'll be right there. As he stuffed the cloak back into his backpack, he didn't want to risk leaving that behind. When he was ready, Harry rounded the statue wand in hand ready to react, only to see that Voldemort was alone, propped up by bundled cloth on a hastily conjured table. Harry reacted quickly, and in a gamble chose the Protego charm. A shivering field of energy surrounded him, reflecting the stunner that had just been fired from behind him directly back at Peter Pettigrew, who had been trying for a sneak attack. Harry was more mad by how quickly the man had gone down than at the attack. How could such an incompetent smear of dragon shit be the one that was responsible for leading Voldemort to his parents? It was just wrong. Harry wanted to make the man pay, but he had knocked himself out, and now he couldn't justify slitting the rat's throat during a duel. He wanted to rage at this, but instead had to focus on his main objective for tonight. Harry decided to borrow a play from Dumbledore's book for dealing with Voldemort. Good evening. Tom, lovely night for a party, isn't it? He had to struggle to keep himself from smiling as Voldemort's face contorted with rage. So Dumbledore has told you my birth name, which I abandoned long ago. Dumbledore, no, though I can see where you got that idea. In his position, it would have made sense to train me and give me information on you. But no, Dumbledore hasn't taught me anything. That was technically true. This Dumbledore hadn't taught Harry anything. He slowly walked around the small clearing, which really was little more than two paths between the graves, just wide enough that two men on either side of a coin could walk unobstructed. As he walked, he kept watching Voldemort, his wand at the ready to react to any hostile actions from the so-called Dark Lord. The bundle of cloth kept turning, keeping Voldemort facing Harry. Then, where did you learn such information? He seemed genuinely curious. Oh, I came across an old diary. It had a lot to say about you. Harry saw what little color was in the skin of the mockery of life in front of him fade away. Your diary was quite chatty for a while. Muggle father. In fact, that's his old home up there, isn't it? You killed him instead of letting your Slytherin friends find out you were half Muggle. After all, your squib of a mother wasn't around anymore to back up your claim of being the heir of Slytherin. Harry knew he was winding up Voldemort, but he also knew that Voldemort couldn't risk killing him right now. Not only was Harry still needed for the restoration ritual, he has just revealed that he had a Horcrux in his possession. Voldemort needed to discover just what Harry knew about the Horcruxes and who Harry had told about them. He was relatively safe for the moment. How did you come by my diary? I confess I left it somewhere where I don't think you would be welcome. The tension and displeasure was evident in his voice. Harry had no reason not to say. Lucius Malfoy planted it on a little first-year girl. I think he planned to get her family in trouble. But I found it first and saved the girl before your diary could get its hooks in her. And what did you do with the diary once you were finished with it? If Harry didn't already know that the diary was a Horcrux, he would have guessed that it was important just from how desperate Tom sounded to hear what had happened to it. Harry had agitated him well past his capacity to remain subtle. Why are you so interested? Is the diary important? You seem far more concerned for it than you do about your followers whom I just took down, Harry asked. You will tell me now. Tom screamed at Harry, waving his wand threateningly. Oh, will I now? Harry taunted. That was a stroke too far for Voldemort, and he raised his wand at Harry, Crucio. This was just what Harry had been waiting for. His plan was quite simple. He needed to disarm Voldemort. However, a disarming charm was probably one of the easiest spells to block. He needed Voldemort's wand to be busy casting something else. He was sure Voldemort wouldn't kill him when there was still a chance to finish the ritual, and he added even more reason to keep him alive by revealing he had the diary Horcrux, a piece of Voldemort's very soul. Of course, if Harry had revealed he had destroyed it, then he doubted Voldemort would have even hesitated to try and kill him. Harry had been hoping that Voldemort would try the Imperius first, make him revive Wormtail and Crouch, then tie himself to the grave so that they could finish the restoration ritual. This time around, Voldemort had no way of knowing that Harry could completely throw off the curse, so it would have made sense. Unfortunately, Harry had pushed Voldemort too far to be thinking completely straight, so he had sent the torture curse, probably intending to teach him a lesson. Harry, while he wasn't expecting a Crucio, was expecting something, so as soon as Voldemort shot a curse at him, he flung himself to the side and cast an Expelliarmus at Voldemort. Both spells flew through the air. The Crucio curse found its mark first, catching Harry on his arm even as he tried to avoid the spell. Harry's world turned to nothing but pain. It was as though someone had exposed every single nerve ending Harry had, then thrown him into a vat of acid. Harry had no concept of time or hope. He just wanted the pain to end. Luckily, his relief came after only a moment, as his Expelliarmus spell was already fully formed and on its way to Voldemort before he was hit. Even after Harry had been overwhelmed by the pain, the spell continued to do as it was intended and struck Voldemort right in the chest. Voldemort's wand flew out of his hand, and without his wand, the Dark Lord couldn't keep directing magic into his curse. Harry had no memory of how he ended up on the floor, though he was sure he could piece it together easily enough given the curse he had just been hit with. It has been a long time since Harry had experienced pain like that, and he hoped it would be even longer until he experienced it again. He rallied his will and used it to climb to his feet. Before he did anything else, Harry summoned Voldemort's wand, and after a few moments of consideration, he used a sticking charm to affix the wand to his arm. The sticking charm would keep the wand from being summoned or swiped from his pocket. He then mentally kicked himself for forgetting about the wands of the other two wizards and summoned Wormtails and Crouches as well and stuck them to his arm as well before lowering his sleeve. Harry glanced over at Voldemort and saw that he was looking at Harry's sleeve with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He had a sudden flash of a possible future where Babemort reached up his sleeve and without even trying to draw the wand, gripping its handle and casting the killing curse. Harry quickly used the same charm and stuck the cuff of his sleeve to his wrist to prevent such access. Voldemort started to rant, which was mildly entertaining for about a minute. He was going on about being immortal, that it didn't matter what Harry did to this body, and it was only a matter of time until he returned, and then he would see Harry suffer for daring to oppose Lord Voldemort, the rightful heir of the noble house of Slytherin. Harry got bored of listening to the mad ramblings and cast a silencing charm on Voldemort, then cast the stunning spell on Wormtail and Crouch again. They were supposed to stay unconscious for at least an hour if you didn't apply the counter charm, but Harry wasn't going to risk it. Harry also bound Wormtail up in ropes and hit him with an incarcerous spell, then floated the bodies over and set them down next to Voldemort. He levitated the Triwizard Trophy, which was also the portkey back to Hogwarts, over to where the unconscious Death Eaters laid at the feet of their helpless master. Next, Harry brought the body of Nagini over and watched Voldemort go into a silent rage at seeing what he had done to the Horcrux and Familiar. Harry ignored the tantrum and rummaged in his backpack for a potion flask that he had brought. He used the bottle to take a sample of the potion Voldemort was going to use, but as he didn't want to touch the potion, he used the Wingardium Leviosa spell to dip the flask into the liquid. He put in the stopper, cleaned up the flask with a spell, and put the sample into his backpack. Harry didn't know what he was going to do with the sample, but if nothing else, it was evidence that Voldemort planned to do something here. He then vanished the remaining potion and shrunk down the cauldron until it fit in Harry's backpack. Portkeys require skin contact to transport a person, and the Triwizard portkey was set up to respond to touch. Harry had a difficult time getting two unconscious men and an uncooperative toddler as well as himself to touch the cup at the same time, but he was finally able to do it, and for the second time in under an hour, he felt the hook in his middle as he was pulled through a tunnel of wind. Harry arrived back at the school, landing on what was evidently meant to be the winner's platform. Unlike the last time when everyone had assumed that Harry had just been teleported out of the maze to the platform and started celebrating, this time it was a sense of relief that washed through the crowd. He didn't know why, but apparently the whole school had already been told about the kidnapping. Almost as soon as Harry had recovered from his landing, if you were feeling charitable, two people in red aura robes came running up to him. "Mr. Potter, can you tell us what happened?" He was surprised to see Kingsley Shacklebolt was asking the question. Harry took a second to compose himself before saying, "I was kidnapped by Peter Pettigrew." He gave Wormtail a kick as he said that, and Barty Crouch Jr. Jr. also got his own kick. "They plan to use my blood in a restoration ritual to restore Voldemort here." He lifted up Babemort to a full body rather than just a parasite inhabiting the body of a homunculus. To cut a long story short, Junior claims his father is under the Imperius, and they used him to enter my name into the tournament. Dumbledore was finally able to catch up with a very distressed-looking Minister Fudge, who had lost nearly all his support. A lot of the men who were sent to Azkaban for rioting at the World Cup were his political supporters, and with Lucius dead, he wasn't getting the money he used to get votes in the Wisengamot anymore. Fudge was holding on to his job by a thread, and he knew it. Any kind of scandal, and Fudge would be out of the minister's office, and would be very lucky to head up the Department for Magical Catastrophes again. Dumbledore and Fudge both demanded to know what had happened, so Harry decided to throw the minister a bone. The penalty for escaping Azkaban is the Dementor's kiss, right? Harry asked. So I say we do that quickly, but with full public scrutiny. It will be a win for you in the press. It's a pity we didn't get Lestrange as well, but two dangerous supporters of Val you know, who removed from posing a danger to the public. And while we are at it, let's give this bit of shit to them as well. Harry indicated the still silenced Voldemort in his hands, but before he could say any more, he was interrupted by what might just be the strongest hug Hermione had ever given him. His bushy-haired girlfriend had finally pushed past everyone to get to Harry, and now that she had no intention of letting him go. Chapter 20. Chapter text, Chapter 20. Dumbledore was shocked at Harry advocating for the use of the Dementor's kiss. He was going to object to it on principle, but then thought about it. Nothing he or Harry said could save Peter or Junior from that fate that had been the law ever since the British ministry had started using Azkaban as a prison. It was part of the treaty they had with the Dementors. There were certain crimes that had to be an automatic kiss sentence. As for Tom, there was no hope of saving him. He had progressed so far down the road to darkness that his very existence was an affront to the natural balance of both magic and nature. Also, while it may not solve the problem permanently, it would be a major setback, as the part of Tom with the most knowledge and experience would be gone. The remaining portions would only know what they knew when they were separated, so whatever they learned since is separated from what the main soul had learned. But that couldn't be the right answer, could it? Dealing with Tom's darkness was supposed to be countered by light magic and acts of love, not by one of the darkest creatures that magic ever spawned. Dumbledore almost considered that Harry had gone dark, with what he had done to the Malfoy heir, and now to Voldemort and his Death Eaters. It was as if Harry was trying to be as destructive as possible while staying just inside the law. Dealing with young Draco, Harry had shown mercy too, giving the boy a path to remain out of Azkaban and a way to keep his family alive. And even now, as Harry stood there convincing the minister to call for a few Dementors to meet them outside the gates to Hogwarts, he stated that he wouldn't allow the monsters onto the school grounds. And all the time he was comforting Miss Granger, someone that it was clear Harry loved. Dumbledore was staring at what to him was something he thought was impossible. Harry was a true contradiction, dark and light, and Dumbledore had no idea how to deal with that. Harry found that Fudge wasn't that hard to convince, especially as there were more than a few Wisengamot seat holders watching the final task who had come over to see what was going on, and who had recoiled in horror hearing Harry explain that the child was in fact a homunculus that was housing what was left of the spirit of Voldemort. Fudge would much rather that headlines read that Voldemort was defeated than accuse him of not taking decisive action, so he sent Kingsley to retrieve a Dementor. Harry, who was floating the three prisoners in front of him, was surprised by the number of people who were following them. Of course, Sirius, who had joined them not long after Hermione, but 3 members of the Wisengamot also came to act as witnesses, and a few members of the public decided they wanted to see this for their own reasons. Harry thought they were out of their minds. If he could be anywhere else while this was happening, he would gladly take the opportunity. The only student apart from Harry who was with them was Hermione. A few others had tried to follow them, but Professor McGonagall rallied the teachers, and they collectively put their feet down and sent the rest of the students to the castle. Dumbledore and Snape were the last 2 to go with Harry and the minister. They got to the front gates long before the 2 Auras got there. The group stood around in silence as they waited, almost as if magic itself had decided to cast a silencing charm on the whole area. Harry had once read a line in a novel Hermione had lent him. The quiet was so silent that it was screaming at them. At the time, Harry had thought the line pure fantasy, a writer trying to be poetic, But as the minutes ticked by, he was forced to reconsider that idea. Suddenly, there was a rush of wind, and Kingsley returned via Portkey with Amelia Bones. The head of all the departments that made up the DMLE. Harry could understand Kingsley going to her to cover his ass. Fudge had basically just signed off on an execution without a trial. While it wasn't a true execution, because Voldemort still had a Horcrux out there was no way for the minister, Kingsley, or Director Bones to know that. And even though Harry didn't think there would be any backlash over denying Voldemort his right of trial, it was normal they would want to check. Harry conjured his patroness, and he and the other witnesses retreated back into the warmth and protection the stag offered from the tall robed figure that had arrived with the two auras. Almost everyone there looked shocked at Harry casting such an advanced spell, except Hermione, who had seen his patroness plenty, and Dumbledore, who already knew time travel was involved. Kingsley revived Crouch and forced some Veritaserum that the director had brought with her down his throat. She asked him how it was that he had escaped Azkaban, but more importantly had him confirm the identity of the other two. Once it was confirmed that Voldemort was in the homunculus, Crouch went on to describe how Bellatrix and Pettigrew had created the homunculus for Voldemort's spirit to inhabit. Harry thought it was going to be the execution that upset him, but it was the description of the torture and murder of 7 innocent muggles that reintroduced Harry to the cereal bar and Lucozade that he had consumed in the maze. Hermione, who looked just as sick as Harry felt, but who had managed to keep from being sick by virtue of having not eaten recently, pulled out her wand and cleaned up the mess and hit Harry with a very welcome breath-freshening charm. The last question Crouch was asked he was unable to answer. When asked where Lestrain was, he simply said, "I don't know." They didn't bother reviving Wormtail or Voldemort, and Harry stunned Crouch before he was given to the Dementor. When Director Bones asked Harry why he had done that, he replied, "It's all well and good to execute the man, but there is no need to torture the man with fear first." A few looked like they wanted to protest, but Dumbledore and Bones both just nodded at Harry. It was obvious the two of them understood what he was saying. They all watched as the Dementor picked up Crouch with one hand and pulled his hood back enough so that Crouch's head was able to slip into the folds. There was a bleak glow of pale light, and the Dementor released Crouch Jr., who collapsed back to the floor. Director Bones hit Crouch with the Reanimate spell, but Crouch didn't move, so she hit Crouch with a stinging hex. There was a small flinch from the sudden pain, but apart from that, nothing. There was no Crouch Jr. anymore, just an empty shell. The sentence has been carried out. Bartemius Crouch Jr. has passed from this world, said the director, the words having some ceremony to them. Harry suddenly had a thought and was glad that Voldemort had been stunned. The last thing they needed was for Voldemort to flee his current body and dive into Crouch. Harry wasn't sure, but he guessed that without a soul of its own, Crouch's body would accept Voldemort in a way Quirrell's body never could. Once they were done with Crouch, they moved on to Peter Pettigrew. The only real difference here was that Sirius got the mad look in his eye that Harry had only seen once in the previous timeline, in the Shrieking Shack, when Harry still believed that Sirius was the one to sell out his parents. Harry knew that the man would flip-flop back and forth for probably the next month, on one hand happy that the betrayer had been dealt with, and the other mourning the loss of his old friend, Wormy. Harry could understand that. The reason betrayal hurt so much was because you still had all the positive memories and feelings that were now tainted. Peter Pettigrew passed in the same manner as Crouch Jr., and Director Bones once more checked the living but lifeless body before making the pronouncement. For all the anticipation in the crowd of witnesses, Voldemort's execution was almost exactly the same as the previous two, with one notable exception. When the Dementor sucked out what was left of the soul, the light that glowed for about a second during the kiss was blood red instead of the silvery white that had come from everyone else. As the light flashed, Harry felt his scar burn, only for a second, but it was still the worst pain he had felt since coming back in time. He winced and caught Dumbledore giving him a knowing look. Director Bones once more did her test, but when it came to pronouncing the death of Voldemort, she hesitated. Harry realized what it was, and so gave her what she needed. Tom Riddle, that's his legal name. Whispers broke out among the crowd as Harry casually gave out one of the biggest secrets in the country, but Director Bones ignored it and made her announcement. The sentence has been carried out. Tom Riddle has passed from this world. As soon as the director had finished, Harry had what must have been the weird experience he had ever had. He had a flash of memories, but each one was less than a second long and had a person saying a single word before moving to the next. My task is complete. I will return now. Suddenly the Dementor disappeared, sinking into the shadows. Harry realized that this must be how the Dementors communicate, a combination of legilimency and making you relive your memories. It was both strangely interesting and disturbingly creepy. After everyone had left, Harry found himself in a room he didn't recognize, sitting on a sofa with Hermione's arms around him. The last thing he could clearly remember was asking Hermione if he was a bad person. He tried to remember how he got from the hallway where he asked that question to an unknown room that looked rather comfortable, with large French windows that were open to let a cool breeze to tackle the summer heat. The only other thing he could say was he thought he saw Hermione walking up and down the seventh-floor corridor, the room of requirement. Harry turned to look at Hermione and found she was looking at him in concern. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Hermione's voice was soft, and she was being careful like she didn't want to spook him. Harry told her about what he did, how Crumb had called him cruel for using fire and not using the killing curse, how he had killed the snake by letting it bleed out from his wounds, and how he had fed people to a Dementor. He hadn't just let the law deal with the three prisoners, he had actively encouraged the Minister of Magic to have all three kissed with no trial or them having any chance to defend themselves. Not just killing them, their souls were eaten, destroyed as far as wizards could tell. He had taken part in the destruction of souls, knowingly, willingly. He was a monster now. Hermione strongly disagreed with that. "Harry, you are not a monster. You are one of the best people in the world. 10 years ago, when I had to leave you to go after Quirrell on your own, I said you were a great wizard, Harry. You have spent the time since then proving me right. Monsters don't feel like you do right now. Monsters have no remorse for killing people. You feel bad for killing those that clearly are monsters." Hermione hugged him closer, pulling his head onto her breast as she tried to soothe his heart. "But I had people killed, Hermione. How am I ever going to be okay again? With time, Harry, maybe try talking with people who have been where you are right now. Maybe someone like Mad-Eye. I'm sure he had to kill in the Blood War. I'm not sure Mad-Eye is a good person to copy here. The mad part of his name has nothing to do with his eye, after all," Harry quipped. It wasn't that funny, but Hermione laughed anyway as it broke the tension a little. "Maybe he is a few fingers short of a trifle, but you wouldn't call him a monster, would you?" Hermione pointed out. He had to give her that point. Of all the things that you could say about the man, the only part of him that you could call monstrous was his appearance. But what if this is only the start? I still need to deal with Lestrange and what is left of Tom. Plus, we still need to decide what to do with Snape. What if this is just the tip of the iceberg? What if I became nothing but a killer? "That would never happen, Harry," Hermione said. He tried to say something, but she put her finger on his lips. "Just listen for a moment, Harry. There is so much more to you than some chosen one. You love flying, you want a family and a real home. You are great with magical creatures, you are a great teacher. You are so much more than you give yourself credit for. We just need to get past some obstacles before we can start building the life we want to have. And I promise you, if you ever start to forget, I will be right there to remind you who you are and why we are doing this." Once Hermione finished talking, she climbed into his lap so that she was facing Harry, her legs either side of his, and she leaned down and claimed his lips with hers. She knew that what he needed right now was a distraction and a reminder that the world was not some joyless hellscape, that hope and happiness were still there. As she kissed him, Hermione started to unbutton Harry's shirt. This life had been good for him, especially physically. Without being sent to the Dursleys every summer to be half-starved, Harry had been able to fill out with a bit of muscle. Plus, with his training for the Triwizard Tournament, that muscle, while lean and wiry, had enough definition that Hermione felt a small thrill as she ran her hands over them. She could actually feel as the stress and tension started to leave Harry as his muscles started to relax. It hadn't taken Fudge long to get the story out to the papers. It was in a special evening edition of The Prophet the very next day. The story, written by Rita Skeeter, heaped praise on both Harry and Minister Fudge. Harry for winning the Triwizard Tournament and defeating Voldemort again at the same time, and Minister Fudge for his quick and decisive handling of the situation. The article also mentioned what happened to Crouch Sr. He was sent to a secure ward at St. Mungo's for evaluation after being the victim of the Imperious Curse. Unfortunately for him, as soon as the healers decide he is fit, he will be facing charges for assisting in a prison escape and prolonged use of an unforgivable curse. The speculation in the paper was that Crouch will probably avoid the Dementor's kiss for the charges due to his long history in the Ministry, but that he would probably face the life sentence in Azkaban for his crimes. Harry wasn't sure how he felt about Crouch Sr. On one hand, he had broken an unrepentant Death Eater out of prison, one responsible for torturing Neville's parents into insanity. But it was his son. Harry could at least understand why the man had done it. Harry had once again become infamous inside Hogwarts. He couldn't go anywhere without the Whispers following him around. The first time he had walked into the hall after the Prophet had published the story, almost the whole school had stood and clapped for him, and people kept coming up to him and thanking him for what he had done. Often the people thanking him would tell him a story of a family member that they barely remembered, or that they had grown up hearing stories about who had died in the Blood War. The more they thanked him, however, the more hollow Harry felt. Hermione had helped him get over the hump that had developed because he had helped kill 3 people. He wasn't okay with what he had done, but he was improving. However, he knew that it wasn't over. Voldemort still had one more Horcrux, and Harry had no idea where the cup was located. The war wasn't over yet, but people were praising him like he had won. The one handshake Harry was happy to accept was the one from Neville. Harry's roommate had come up to him in the dorm room the night after the paper had published the story and thanked him, telling Harry the story of what had happened to his parents. Harry just listened as Neville told him the story, all the time thanking him for dealing with the man who was eventually one of their killers. During the last couple of weeks of term, Harry had taken to hiding from everyone but Hermione in the room of requirement. It was easier to hide away, especially when he didn't have classes to attend, than to put up with all the whispering. While most of the whispering was more positive, at least if you consider, "Oh, Merlin, there goes Potter, isn't he amazing?" To be positive, there were still a few who definitely were not members of the Harry Potter fan club. While a lot of them were in Slytherin, there were some people in every house that were shooting him dark looks and were saying things in harsh whispers when they saw him. That's not to say that all of Slytherin was bad. A number of the green-robed students came up to him and thanked him for what he had done. He just hoped that over the summer everyone would calm down and he could go back to the more quiet life he had enjoyed since coming back in time. Yeah, and he better get started on practicing using the Wingardium Leviosa spell on large, heavy mammals, because the wizarding world would treat him normally when pigs fly. Letter 3DF, letter 3DF, letter 3DF. Bellatrix Lestrange stepped into her vault, and her eyes fell on the chalice that her master had entrusted her with. Her master had sent her to retrieve it, as he would need the restorative magics that the cup processes to speed up his full recovery after he finished his restoration ritual. The hardest part had been getting into Gringotts without being seen. Well, that and not killing the goblins for taking so long to verify her identity, because she had no idea where her old vault key was after all these years. The goblins, filthy creatures that they are, at least only cared about their contracts and how you behaved in their bank. You could murder half the world, and as long as you followed your agreements with them and behaved in their bank, then they didn't care what you had done. Bellatrix picked up the chalice from the pedestal she had placed it on, a treasure of her master's deserved pride of place in her vault. As her hand closed on the golden metal, she could feel the power of her master humming inside it. She ran her finger over the badger that was engraved into its surface and frowned. The badger engraving was the only part of the artifact that had never felt like her master's power. It was almost as if that one part of it had refused her master. She wanted to destroy it for refusing him, but his instructions had been clear. She was to protect the artifact at all costs, and his word was law. Her prize in hand, Bellatrix also collected a moleskin pouch from a drawer of them and stuffed it full of gold, as a sack of gold was always useful. She returned to the goblin that was wading nervously next to the cart. The disgusting little creature was annoying, but killing it would just cause problems that she couldn't deal with alone. "Take me back up now," she ordered. The goblin bowed deeply to her. "Right away, Lady Lestrin." As they travelled up the tunnels, Bellatrix drew a small flask from her handbag and finished off the second half of the potion just before they arrived at the main floor of the bank. It was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair that stepped out of the cart and left the bank. Bellatrix had an appointment with her master she was running late for. She had been devastated when she returned to the graveyard and found that her master hadn't been restored, but she was absolutely distraught a few days later when she managed to get an old copy of the Daily Prophet. Discovering what the Potter brat and the bumbling fool of a minister of magic had done had almost broken her, at least until she felt her master's magic in the cup. There were old stories about becoming immortal, even children's tales about such a feat. The warlock's hairy heart had never been a favorite of hers, but if any wizard could figure something like that out, it was her master. With those thoughts to keep her calm, Bellatrix Lestrange was able to recall some instructions her lord had given her if something like this were to happen. So she got everything she needed. An atheme. She looked at the ritual dagger in her hand. Check. A stone altar that had been in use for at least 250 years. The country was full of really old churches. She had just picked one suitable for her needs. The heart's blood of a virgin. The stupid muggle teen on the altar had provided that, just a dumb teen who had followed her at the prospect of losing the very virginity that was the only thing that made him a use to her. Bellatrix squeezed the boy's heart, milking the blood into the chalice. "My lord, my master, my love, may you return to us. With this, you shall rise more powerful than ever before." Bellatrix recited to herself, before picking up the chalice and drinking the heart's blood in one swift gulp.